Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, December 22nd, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News Recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we'll head over to Allen, where he meets with Chad Whitaker, head of open source at Sentry, to talk about how corporate donations will be core to sustainable growth and creative individualism, not to mention securing the open source supply chain. Alan will then speak to Martin Resch, CEO of Netography, to discuss Netography's latest paper, A Reckoning, the massive implications of losing network visibility and control. Then Alan will sit down with Nate Stewart, Chief Product Officer of Cockroach Labs, to talk about its most comprehensive update for CockroachDB, simplifying daily life for developers and making them more efficient by reducing the amount of application logic required to operate its hyper-resilient cloud-native database. Next up, we're airing episode 5 of our series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. Then we go to AWS reInvent, where Mitch spoke with Matt Butcher, co-founder and CEO of Fermyon, to discuss how Fermyon is pioneering cloud computing with its first cloud-native WebAssembly SaaS that lets developers build better microservices faster. We will then air an episode of Techstrong Research Review. In their last show of 2022, Mike and Mitch do a year-end retrospective, highlighting the major trends and discussing what's in store for 2023. Then Mike Rothman will interview Ido Gino, founder and CEO of Rapid, about the state of API economies, the importance of curated and validated APIs as application building blocks, and what's to come in 2023. Then we have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike Vizard interviews Alex Ilgiev, a security researcher for Cycode, as Alex dives into a vulnerability discovered in an open source code C tool and how it became the latest example of why there needs to be more focus in securing software supply chains. Then, Mike interviews Loft Labs CEO Lucas Gentile, as Lucas explains why donating an open source dev space tool to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation will advance Kubernetes developer productivity. Finally, we go back to AWS reInvent, where Mike Rothman spoke to Anjan Kundavaram, Chief Product Officer at Precisely, about data ops as a whole and the company, a data integrity solution that works towards developing accessible and trustworthy data. Also at AWS reInvent, Alan spoke with Sarwar Raza, Vice President of Managed Cloud Services at Red Hat, to discuss how Red Hat's recently announced expansion of its open source solutions is now publicly available in the AWS marketplace. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
Do you know what you want?
Can we afford this place?
I'm thinking 1,000-piece Kubernetes, cloud workload protection, and XDR combo.
Yeah, I actually don't see any prices.
Hello, how can I schedule a demo for you today?
So we're on a budget.
Okay.
How much is your 1,000-piece Kubernetes?
What solutions are you currently evaluating?
You don't have to order off that thing.
We don't?
How did you get in here?
Check this out.
Optic's secret dollar menu.
Order today and you can secure any combo of cloud and endpoint assets through the end of next year. All for $1.
What if I want to secure 100 Mac laptops and 900 Linux servers?
Yeah, $1.
What if I want 500 laptops and 500 Kubernetes nodes? Just $1?
Yep, mix and match to create the combo that works for you.
What about customer support?
Yep, everything for just $1.
We're gonna order off the Uptick secret dollar menu.
And seriously, how did you get in here?
Seriously.
Seriously.
Try the Uptick's combo of CNAP and XDR, delivered in a single UI and data model. Just $1 to secure your cloud, containers, and laptops through the end of next year. Offer ends December 31st.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for December 22nd. First up, the Federal Trade Commission has reached a settlement for 2 cases against Epic Games, hitting them with a $520 million fine. Epic Games, which is the creators of the massively successful video game Fortnite, has to pay $245 million worth of customer refunds for deceptive billing practices and $275 million for collecting the personal data of Fortnite players younger than 13 without informing parents or getting consent to do so. These fines will be the biggest penalty ever imposed for breaking an FTC rule. Epic Games has stated that they have already made changes to stop these practices and that have led to getting fined in the first place. Next, Core Scientific, one of the largest publicly traded cryptocurrency mining companies, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Over 2022, Core Scientific has lost approximately 98% of its value. The crypto sector hasn't fared much better, as it's more than $1 trillion in value have been wiped from it. The downturn has even wiped out several major players in the space, such as Three Arrows Capital and Celsius Network. The fallout of FTX filing for bankruptcy last month also has plagued other crypto companies, as has dropped hopes for recovery of crypto prices in the near future. In other news, the EU is looking into Broadcom's $61 billion deal to buy the cloud technology company VMware over concerns that it could stifle competition. The EU's Executive Commission opened an investigation that will look into whether or not Broadcom's acquisition of VMware will lock out rival technology, ultimately raising prices and lowering innovation for customers and consumers. Broadcom announced plans to purchase VMware to get a foothold in the cloud computing market this past May, and the Commission will have until this upcoming May to decide if the deal can go through. While on the subject of the EU, Amazon has announced that it will change its business practices in order to end antitrust probes in Europe. The EU Executive Commission has approved several legally binding commitments Amazon has made to resolve antitrust investigations. These changes that Amazon will have to make revolve around giving customers more visible choices when buying products, including multiple buy boxes, and making access of its Prime sellers membership more easy. This is a major advance for EU authorities that are trying to limit the power of big tech, and we might see similar steps forward elsewhere too, as Amazon is facing similar scrutiny in the US and UK. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at cybersecurity in 2022. As we wrap up the year, it is important to take a look back and see what worked and what didn't. This article takes a look at both the good and the bad. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at how OpVisor has extended its monitoring capabilities to cloud computing environments. This new expansion that starts with both AWS and Microsoft Azure comes as more companies are looking to find a balance between monitoring predefined metrics and an observability platform to find unknown issues. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an article looking at a report that shows the complexities when it comes to implementing cloud-native observability. The results found that 75% of companies are focusing on cloud-native applications, but 87% of engineers said that it comes with increased complexity in terms of troubleshooting incidents. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. Our guest for this segment, it's the first time he's been on our show. I want to introduce you to Chad Whitaker of Sentry. Hey Chad, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Alan.
It's a pleasure. So Chad, well, let's start with a little bit about you, if you don't mind. Would you share with our audience?
Sure thing. So my name's Chad Whitaker. I'm the head of open source at Sentry. Sentry is an error monitoring and application performance monitoring startup that was actually started. We'll see what we get to in the conversation here, but Sentry was started in 2008 as an open source side project, and now is growing as a startup. And I've been here at Sentry for 2 years.
And kind of what's your background from before Sentry?
Sure. So I guess most relevant to our conversation, I did a startup of my own in 2012 through 2015 called GitTip, later called Gratipay, which was basically a crowdfunding platform for open source projects. So that torch has been picked up by GitHub sponsors, Open Collective, things like that. But so deep roots in the open source community, Python community. And spent a lot of time thinking on and working on open source funding and sustainability.
Very cool. So Sentry started way back in 2008, right? Which by my is maybe 14 years, almost 15 years ago. Another overnight success, right? Started primarily as an open source side project, is what you said, and it's now transitioned into a full-on commercial entity, but it still has open source sort of roots and components.
Very much, and more so than that, open source is really core to Sentry's DNA. It's part of our self-understanding, part of our company identity. We very much think of ourselves as part of the open source community. Our main product is, this error monitoring and application performance monitoring product. And that product is as open source as we can make it. So again, that was started in 2008 as an open source side project. Started commercializing in 2012 as a little Heroku plugin. That's actually personally when I started using it. So longtime customer, and then 2015, 2016 is when they reorganized as a Delaware C Corp so they could take venture capital investment and really started the growth trajectory. So, about 7 or 8 years there, just as kind of an open source side project, lightly commercialized. And then the past 8 years or so, 6, 7, 8 years growing as a startup.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Before we jump into what the meat of our story today, for people who want to get more information on Sentry, Chad, what's the URL?
Sentry.io. 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 If you end up on an insurance company's website, you're on the wrong one.
You're in the wrong
Sentry.io. Yeah, that's the one you want.
We got you.
Yep.
All right. So, Chad, I got an update yesterday from the Open Source Security Foundation, OSSF.
Yeah, sure.
It's part of Linux Foundation.
Yep.
They started this project, I think they call it the Alpha Omega, the beginning and the end, right, project.
Yeah.
And they detailed kind of, it's been a year, their marks or their, high marks for the year and, what's going on. And what I found interesting is, they talked about fundraising, right? Where did the support come from in terms of dollars? And there were the usual suspects in there, Google, I think, and Microsoft and some others. And we're so numb to big numbers that we see something like 2 million, 4 million, and we're like, it's just 2 million.
Right.
2 million is a lot of money.
Right.
But anyway, but it brings up the whole issue of, look, it costs money to support open source. A couple of fallacies that I've seen disproven in my time in the open source world is open source isn't free. The software is free to use, but it costs money to develop software. It costs people's time to develop software. It costs money to monitor and make sure that software is secure. It costs money to run the software oftentimes. It costs money to support and training on software. There are inherent costs in maintaining open source software.
Yeah.
And like in any business model, we could shift the burden of those costs to different players in the ecosystem. I know you have sort of your views on where those burdens should lie.
Sure.
Let's hear.
Okay, so I guess let me start with this, Alan. We'll see if we can get into it. We talk about the open source community. And the way I think about the open source community is I think about multiple ways to kind of structure it or kind of break it down. But one that I think is relevant for us here is you've got the open source community, kind of think about it in 3 buckets. There's the part of the open source community that wants nothing to do with money, right? Somebody's got an open source project and they love writing code and they're going to keep writing code, whether you pay them or not. And actually, they don't want money to come anywhere near their open source work, right? And that's fine. Okay, so that's one slice of the open source community. There's another slice of the open source community I'll put over here. We're talking about commercial open source. So we talk about Sentry. Our product is as open source as we can make it, and we're a growing startup, right? So there's kind of those two ends of the spectrum, and then in the middle we have this slice of the open source community that I think of as the community supported portion of the open source community. They're not commercializing in the way that Sentry is, and yet they're also not totally averse to mixing money and open source. And this is what we see folks like GitHub sponsors going after, Open Collective going after, some of these new platforms like ThanksDev and StackAid. And really, we're talking about Linux Foundation here and OpenSSF. We're trying to find ways of funding this. Like, this is the hard one to fund, right? Like, these folks don't have a problem because they're not asking for funding. Folks like Sentry, like, we don't have a problem because we have a business model, but it's this slice in the middle of folks that are doing a lot of work, a lot of volunteer labor. And this is the classics, right? Like, where we get the Heartbleeds and the Log4js and things like this, right? These kind of showcase examples of where it breaks down here, where this is the problem we've got here is how do we make this slice here sustainable so that the folks that are working on their open source libraries or what have you, and are interested in bringing money into the mix somehow, I'll say, this is the problem we haven't solved yet.
Yep.
Does that fit with what you see, Alan?
Yeah. I have just a slightly different close.
Okay.
Here's my analogy. I always tell people.
Okay.
So I think I think back to when I first became involved in open source.
Yeah.
And to me, I call that the era of the cathedral and the bazaar. You know that book,
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Eric Raymond, yes, ours, yeah.
Yep. And Richard Stallman, the pure open source where we don't want no stinking money, messing up our nirvana that we're building software for the love of software.
Okay.
And that was a very popular movement. It's how open source started, right? It was like really the ultimate geek kind of thing, right? Where I do it for the love. I think open source then moved into what I call the Big Brother era.
Okay.
Where almost every open source project had a corporate Big Brother who, for all intents and purposes, ran the open source project. And I'm not, IBM's a perfect example of this. There are others. I'm not saying it's inherently evil, by the way. That's a perfectly fine model.
Okay.
Right?
So you got For the Love, you got the Big Brother.
Right. And then the third era for me is what I call and I'm an Asimov fan, so I call it the Foundation era.
Okay. Here we go.
And in here where we have co-opetition community, as you called it, coalescing around open source projects. And the beauty of it is companies that would normally not work together because they're competitors are somehow in this,
finding a way.
Right, where they're cooperating to a certain extent.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. And so it allows Microsoft and Google to both support OpenSSF, or it allows that kind
Linux
of
Foundation is probably the best example we have of that.
Yeah, but Eclipse, Linux, Apache, all the foundations are pretty good about it, because it takes it out of the hands of just a single big brother who runs it. At the end of the day, it's like the benevolent king in Plato, the philosopher king, right? Is he going to run it for the good of the community, or does he run it for his own benefit?
Sure.
Not, Sentry may do a great job of running it for the good of the community, but there's always who's taking charge next. So to me, those are the kind of eras of open source, or dominant forms of open source that we've been through. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I do think, though, that with the onset of this foundational era, we've seen open source explode like never before.
Sure. Well, another way to slice open source is, I guess I go this way for the funding buckets, and maybe I'll go this way for this. I basically think of it as kind of like OS level, application development level, or framework or language level, and then kind of end user application level, right? Yeah. So we're talking about Linux Foundation, we're talking about OpenSSF. I mean, that's really down here, right? That's like, that's the OS level. A lot of where Sentry, where we spend our time thinking about open source, is kind of, and this is because, we're a developer tools company. So, we think a lot about the developer. So we spend a lot of our time here at this application development framework level. So thinking about the Pythons and the JavaScripts and the web frameworks and the Laravels.
Absolutely.
Else, right.
Where would you put CNCF?
CNCF down here. I mean, that's infrastructure.
Below.
Yeah.
Pure infrastructure.
Yeah, it's more infrastructure, right? It's, how are you, now data center to cloud, right? Like that's, I think of that as kind of broadly down there in that level. Up here are things like Inkscape and like, VLC, right? Like end user applications, LibreOffice, things like this, right? Like that are designed for a consumer. Yeah, exactly. That kind of thing. So I think that's an interesting distinction to keep in the mix too, because, I think where we're seeing, you talk about the $2 million, the $5 million, and the Googles and the Microsofts, like that's down here at this level, and honestly with Sentry, a lot of where we spend our time is kind of at this level, and the frameworks and the languages and how to support folks in there. Yeah. So a lot of different stuff going on. I mean, certainly, imagine, like you said, you've been in, you've seen open source go from, 1998 Halloween documents, Microsoft, like trying to squish it, to now Microsoft, a few years ago now.
There's a big promoter, but
biggest, right? Bought
but
GitHub,
I was also there when we would have fights to the death over what licensing I was using, right? Was it upper, lower, GPL, or was it MIT, or was it, whatever?
Yeah.
You don't hear much of that anymore.
I don't know. If you use the BSL license, you do.
Yeah, this is true.
Definitely some licensing conversations to be had.
You know what else has been a big change for me, Chad? Back earlier on, let's say in the Cathedral Bazaar era, there were a lot of people who would get pissed off if you were making money off of excuse my language, they'd be upset if you were making money off of
or if you're making money in the wrong way, right? It's like,
it was very, what was the wrong way versus the right way? It kind of changed, I think, depending who you were. But now I think for the most part, developers, consumers, they recognize, they want their software free if possible, but they recognize you're entitled to have a commercial business model. Someone's entitled to make money for their time and effort.
Well, and there's different economic things at play here, right? Because two things I want to put out there. Number one is this post, my friend VM Brasseur wrote this post, open source is not a business model. Her point is open source is a development model, and then there's business models over here. And, it's an open question kind of how those two relate, and an ongoing conversation about, well, what business models are appropriate for open source. But open source itself is a software development model. It doesn't have an inherent business model inherent to it. That's why this conversation about, well, how do we plug these two together? Number two that I want to put out here is this idea of rivalrous and non-rivalrous goods. And what's the other one? Rivalrous, non-rivalrous, and excludable and non-excludable. This is a framework for analyzing different goods in the world and how they're produced. And open source really fits in two of the two places in the quadrant. And this is my friend Nadia. Let me get her name right because it's not Egbal anymore. Asparuhova, I think is how you pronounce it. Nayafia on Twitter. She has a book about this book out about open source, and she has this helpful analysis where she says that open source really fits in two of these economic categories. From the point of view of the digital asset, it's a public good, meaning, zero transactional cost to download the millionth copy of something versus the first copy of something. So essentially free. It's this public good. But then this is the crucial part. And this gets back to something you were saying earlier. The time and attention it takes to maintain the software is not free, right? The maintainer attention and effort, that is what we would call a common pool resource. So it's not a public good, it's a commons. And there's different ways of managing a commons than economically managing a public good. So that's just another framework. I guess I'm throwing out frameworks here, Alan. I feel like we got a lot going on. Yeah.
So ultimately, look, we've moved past the time where if you spoke to people, in the VC community or in the finance, tech finance world,
okay,
Red Hat was the only successful open source company is what you used to hear.
Sure.
There are plenty of successful companies that are very successful using open source software.
Mm-hmm.
Sentry is a good example here, right?
Yeah.
But if we're going to be where should the emphasis lie on? Who's responsible? Whatever money it takes to maintain, we agree there's some cost to doing it. Who should be paying that? The end users of this software? Is it big brother corporations? Is it the community as a whole?
Well, again,
someone's got to pay.
So bringing this kind of to a point, we got our folks that don't want money, so we're not worried about them, and that's certainly part of the open source community, and that's fine. We got the folks like Sentry that have the business model, so we're not worried about that part of open source. The problem we need to solve is this middle part where you've got people working on open source in their free time, giving their work away, and how do we incentivize them? They're interested in some remuneration, let's say, and some payment for what they're doing. How do we incentivize that? And that is fundamentally a common pool resource problem. It's how to avoid a tragedy of the commons. How do we think about that? So, point and answer to your question is the people using the software need to pay for it. Okay. So if companies are benefiting from it, then companies need to be paying for it. Obviously, if end users are benefiting, that's a different model. Again, Sentry, we're mostly focused on this layer here. And I think one thing that we're seeing over time is it seems to be that we're working up the stack in terms of finding solutions to these sustainability challenges. Because I feel like we've made a lot of progress in the past 10 years with Linux Foundation, OpenSSF, companies coming together in co-opetition, like you were saying, right? Like this feels to me like this is solidifying into a workable, sustainable solution. I think, where Sentry, where we're thinking mostly is at this level, web frameworks, mobile frameworks, the libraries, the languages, how do we make sure this is taken care of? And it's the companies that have to pay, right? So just like we've seen companies start to step up down here, we need that next tier of, obviously like Sentry is not as large as a Google or Microsoft, but we're trying to do our part here. And so we need to see an order of magnitude or 4 orders of magnitude, more companies kind of in this space, stepping up and funding the open source dependencies that they're building their businesses on. A lot of great tools out there for this. Yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Let me play devil's advocate a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
It all works. You're 100% correct.
Okay.
Until we run into macroeconomic headwinds like we are now.
Yeah,
and
sure.
all of a sudden,
what's on the chopping block? Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like supporting the open source is one of those things that are deemed expendable or non-critical or what have you.
Yeah.
And that's scary, frankly, right? It gives people pause to say, wait a second, can I count on this? Right.
Well, and that's really what we're trying to get to is, and we're not there yet. And yes, the macroeconomic conditions impact this, but this is a long haul, right? You and I have been at this for 20 plus years, a couple years of slowdown here. Like we're going to get through this and we'll come out the other side. You're right. That definitely plays into it. But really the conversation we need to be having, I think, is how do we manage this like this part of open source, I'm going to find this middle, I guess I got 9 here now, right? Like application framework developers who want to be paid for what they're doing. How do we figure out how to manage this as a common pool resource? And there's tools for this, and we're coming up on time here, so we'll have to talk again in the future. But this is the conversation you need to be having. And yes, the macroeconomic conditions affect it, but let's have this conversation now. I think we do need to build some new structures, just like Linux Foundation's really doing a lot of work down.
Do we have to do sort of a foundational thing in that middle layer?
Something.
Yep. Chad, we are up on time. I got our next guest in the room there, but. Hey, this was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Yes.
You know what? We'll have them kind of run back probably after the first of the year, but we'll run it back and pick it up from here about how do we put that sort of in play, right? How do we put a framework there? No pun intended. How do we put a framework in play there for these, this framework layer? Thanks for coming on and telling us all about Sentry. It's Sentry.io again.
That's it. Yep.
And we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much. Take care.
All righty.
Bye.
We're going to take a break on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm happy to welcome back my friend Marty Resch of Netography. I was really close to saying SourceFire there, but it's Netography. But he's also the guy behind SourceFire too. Hey, Marty, welcome. I hope all is well.
Thanks, Alan. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks. Thank you. Hey, Marty, look, you need no introduction to our audience, but maybe Netography does. I don't know if everyone out here knows Netography. So why don't we, if you don't mind, if we could spend a moment just kind of baselining that.
Okay. So Netography is a company that's taken a new approach to network security, specifically network visibility and control. So speaking of SourceFire, back in the old days, we used to be on appliances and we did deep packet inspection. We looked for attacks and things like that. And that obviously worked well for a long time, and it still works pretty well in a number of places. But the problem is that it's getting harder and harder to do it because in a cloud world, we'll kind of talk about the thinking around this a little more. But in the world that we're in now, which is kind of what we call the atomized network, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud with on-prem infrastructure and mobile remote workforces, I have big problems if I want to understand what's going on in my network environments with figuring out where to put stuff and when to put it there. And, this is a huge issue where, getting capability where I need it, when I need it, and having it deal with the kind of pervasive encryption that's going on in network environments. So Netography is a new approach. We're a pure SaaS play. We don't have any hardware or software to install to make it work. We operate on NetFlow data or flow data coming out of cloud environments or IPFix or, all the different flow types, which are a real-time data type that is generated by all of your deployed network infrastructure plus all of your cloud providers. So it exists everywhere. Most people don't mess with it, but it's a real-time data source, which allows us to do real-time analysis for visibility and control of your network environment using essentially metadata about the environment. So it's a very powerful approach. It's much lighter in terms of what you need to do to get it. It allows you to see basically what's going on across this entire atomized world that's out there.
Excellent. So I have a confession. When I first saw you were involved with Netography, of course, I was very interested and said, what's Marty up to now? And, I ran into this atomized network thing, and I was like, marketing, real, what the heck does it mean? What is it? And quite frankly, in speaking with you on these interviews, I've got my head wrapped around it. But I'm going to guess that for a lot of people in our audience, especially if they haven't seen the prior interviews, and if you haven't, they are available on techstrong.tv. Go check them out. Just search Marty's name and it'll pop. But for people who aren't, Marty, and I know you've given this some thought now, how to kind of boil it down and bullet point it out for people and why they should care and why it's important and what it is. Would you mind kind of educating us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I coined the atomized network term, and I coined it after talking to prospects and customers and things like that. So when I started at Netography about a year and a half ago, I thought we were going to be going into kind of this post-pandemic world, which is a lot more scattered than it was and things like that. But what I found out was that it was much more scattered, and there had been much less kind of oversight for how networks had expanded post-pandemic. Everybody got sent home and they were told, hey, just get your job done, right? So of course they stand up cloud infrastructure everywhere. And as I, talked to more and more people, I was like, there's something new under the sun here. These networks have atomized. You have atoms of presence, atoms of compute that are scattered all over the place. And people are having a really hard time getting their hands around it. So I coined the term and I said, ooh, atomized network. And it's kind of a marketing term. Obviously, we market on it, but it's also, it's also a shorter way of saying multi-cloud, hybrid cloud with on-prem infrastructure plus mobile and remote workforce, right? That is heavily encrypted and, all the other things. So, I started saying that. I saw a lot of heads going up and down, nodding on Zoom calls. I was like, okay, cool. But, as we kind of went down the road, now you and me have both been in the security industry approximately forever, right? So, when we think about stuff and we say stuff, there's a lot of kind of implicit things in the back of our heads from literally decades of experience. So I kind of had that thing too going on, which is like, well, atomized network. And obviously there's implications for all of your security infrastructure that you've deployed. And everybody was like, oh, sure, Marty. Yeah. Okay. And, I've been doing this so long, a lot of people won't call me on it. So, but eventually I found out that, hey, you know what? People don't understand the implications. So we actually have to figure this out and talk about it intelligently. So I came up with, I wrote myself basically a note that was like a ton of text and then turned it into a bunch of bullet points. And then I turned it into 4 words to describe what are the attributes of atomized networks and why are they important? And I even have an acronym for it. So it's so handy.
Okay, here we go.
It's DEED. So DEED stands for distributed, ephemeral, I messed up my own acronym, dispersed, ephemeral, encrypted, and diverse. So dispersed, obviously, these atomized networks are dispersed. They're across multi-clouds. They're also on-prem infrastructure. When people went out and started standing up all this cloud infrastructure during the pandemic, they didn't decommission all this on-prem infrastructure. What they actually did was they started building dependencies between all this stuff, which obviously has security implications, right? So there's that. There's also the ephemeral nature of atomized networks. As we stand up in the cloud and we can spin workloads up and down, this is extremely problematic for the old way of doing things. Having appliances or even virtual appliances that you put in the cloud environment that require licensing and management integration and all these kind of pieces of the puzzle to make them work, you have a substantial problem getting your capabilities to do visibility and control of your network where you need it, when you need it. So that's a big issue. These networks also tend to be heavily encrypted between SaaS and zero trust. Encryption is more and more the norm. So obviously that's a huge problem for deep packet inspection. We saw this all the way back in the Snort days as, SSL was up and coming via e-commerce and then started getting used for more and more. So that blinds deep packet inspection systems. And then the last letter here, diverse, is kind of interesting. And this is something that occurred to me as a part of this kind of conversation with myself. Diverse environments are IT plus cloud, but they're also OT. And when we talk about networks today that are multi-cloud plus IT environments plus OT environments, OT actually exists within a lot of our IT environments in many places. So whether it's, the vending machines in the break room that are plugged into the network, or the light bulbs now, or, the corporate fish tank or whatever, all this stuff is on the internet and is cohabitating in a lot of times with your network environments, or OT could be a factory floor or whatever. Well, we're seeing environments that have all these attributes. And, the interesting thing about it is that, if I have cloud environments, a lot of people in the cloud, they use the native tools. So, AWS CloudTrail and Sentinel and Defender at Azure, or, GCP has its own set. And so they use the native tools there. They use, on-prem infrastructure for on-prem defense. So, Cisco or Palo Alto or Fortinet or whatever. And then they have an esoteric set of vendors that are available for the OT environments as well. So when something happens, by the way, these all use different languages for talking about good and bad. They all have different eventing. They all have different reporting systems, and they probably have different teams operating them as well. So when something happens, and we try to do incident response, how do we, figure out like the scope of the compromise that we suffered, and all the other, scope of containering and remediating is what we do post-compromise. So understand that you've been compromised and scope, contain, and remediate. How do you even do that when you've got all these tools across all these environments with all these teams and all these different languages to try to synthesize a picture together? And if the answer is, well, we dump it in Splunk and run a report, then
Sure.
maybe that's not
well, but that, I mean, look, no knock on Splunk, but quite frankly, that's where the security industry was, or, let's say from 10 to 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, just, Splunk will kind of bring all of this together for us, but A, it's incredibly expensive. B, it's not all it's cracked up to be doing it that way. I think, Marty, nowhere does this come more into focus than in your average hospital. Right. Think about what networks you got running in your hospital.
Yep.
They have kind of your standard IT network, right? Their billing and their, what your normal office kind of stuff runs on their IT network. But then you have a network for medical stuff, right? Medications and nurses and doctor's notes and all of these things. And you have a network for these, the intravenous pumps, the heart monitors, the CAT scan machines, the MRI machines. And by the way, they're all hooked up into the cloud because they're storing all that stuff up there. God, some of them are in public, some of them are in private clouds, right? Because you got HIPAA and whatnot. Then you have the network that the doctors use because they think they're gods and the rules don't apply to them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So when something goes south in a hospital, I pity the poor fools who run security there, because where do they go? How do they bring this all together?
Yeah.
It's a mess. It really is.
Well, it is a mess, and in a lot of ways, that's a great, really crystallizes the problem in kind of one environment, because you also have problems with, hospital environments are very sensitive to a lot of security stuff, especially that's putting packets into the environment, that's doing things like discovery scanning, things like that. You just can't do it.
No.
A lot of other parts of the environment. So, you need approaches that are practical for that, but also that can encompass the whole thing. Whether it's cloud, on-prem, or their OT network, which is, CAT scan machines and drug pumps and things like that, heart monitors. So our opinion and what we have architected for is basically operating in this world. So, from a where you need it, when you need it standpoint, we have nothing to deploy. So obviously, we got a SaaS service, and you point your data sources at us and we start taking it in. We also take in context now. So we can, if you have something like, Axionis, or you have CrowdStrike, or, an IPAM system like Infoblox, we can take all that information in and start attaching it to and labeling the traffic and the devices that we see in the environment. And then same thing with cloud VPCs and stuff like that. So once we have that, you can start saying, well, these are HIPAA devices. They should never respond to inbound traffic from the internet. And you can start monitoring for that. You can start monitoring for how the cloud is being used. And when you see things kind of go off the rails, and when something does happen because of the architecture of the system, it keeps the data around. So retrospection and threat hunting are kind of are already there. So yeah, I'm talking my book, but I believe this is the right approach. And this is the reason that I unretired and came back to work, because this is, if you're going to do network security, it needs to be done. This is the way to go about it, I think.
In today's world, this is what we need. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. So, and this is, I was just on a call yesterday with the CISO of, Big Co. And we've been doing a POV in their environment. It was fascinating to me. I was really excited and interested to see the results, because this is the first company that we've deployed in. Like, we know what the product can do, like write once, detect everywhere, and, one platform for everybody to look at, so on and so forth. But this is the first place we ever deployed into that had cloud, IT, and OT environments. We were watching all of them simultaneously on one platform in one place. And, we picked up some stuff that definitely was not great, but we also picked up a bunch of what we've been finding is that not only is it good for, there's bad guys here and here's what they've been doing, but also just for straight up governance stuff like, hey, why is this factory floor browsing social media, and why is this cloud service talking to this cloud service? Why is dev talking to prod? All those kinds of things. We can see those things. We can see them in real time. And the interesting thing is, we've kind of figured out, well, if you stack us up. Sometimes when we're talking about some of these governance things, the people start saying, well, we've already got CSPM. But it's like, yeah, CSPM is a report-based system. We're a real-time based system. So The interesting thing about it is that CSPM can say, hey, you're configured so dev will talk to prod, go fix that. And they fix it. And then the next push comes out of staging up to prod again. And then all of a sudden they're talking again. We can see that as it happens. Nothing else really can. So it's a different philosophy and a different approach. And I think it's complementary to stuff like a CSPM. It's like, here's how you should be configured and how you are configured. And, here's what's actually happening, which are two different things. It's been really kind of fascinating. I was really, I was on this call yesterday, obviously, and I was really excited to go through the report because it's like, look, we can see this in your IT, we can see this in your cloud, we can see this in your OT, we can see your OT and your IT talking to each other where they shouldn't be, stuff like that. People are like, whoa, this is cool.
So did the CISO kind of say, look, I had no idea, right? This is eye-opening. This is,
he had some positive feedback for sure. Yep.
Cool, man. So let's just bring this home for the audience. So it's no good deed, DEED, right?
Yeah, right.
Good deeds. Marty, I appreciate you going through this with us, but some people are visual. Where can they go get deeds kind of spelled out for them?
So go to our website, www.netography.com. We've got a white paper there that talks about, kind of this massive change that's taking place in the security world, driven by deed environments, and how we have to kind of get to a new way of attacking the problem if we're going to continue to be useful in the future. So go check out our website. We've got this white paper. We've got a bunch of, we're doing a lot of blogging and stuff like that and talking about what we're seeing, what we're thinking, how we see the world. So if you want to get plugged into it, go check out the website, check out our blog, and read the white paper.
So if you, Netography, the Atomized Network, DEED.
That's right.
DEED. It's in that order. Check it out. Marty, fantastic stuff. Listen, as we come in on the end of the year, it's been a crazy year. 2022, I think, will definitely go down as a very unique year for so many reasons. Not all of them good, I'm afraid, but still a unique year. What gets you excited about next year?
Well, I mean, besides the movies I'm anticipating, things like that, I'm really interested to see. So obviously we're early stage, right? So I'm interested to see how some of the initiatives that we've got in the pipeline right now are going to be. And these are all kind of secret squirrel things. So I can't really talk about them right now. But
No, it's okay. We don't want you to. Well, let me ask you this. What movies got you excited?
Oh man, there's John Wick 4 is coming, so you got that.
Yeah. Okay.
You're putting me on the spot here. It's like it's the thing where people are like, "What's the latest book you read?" And you're completely blank. It's like I can see the cover, but I can't think of it. John Wick 4 definitely. There's a couple other science fiction ones that I was really interested in, and not Avatar too. I mean, I'm kind of interested in that kind of intellectually.
Come on, tell the truth. You're going to see that before Christmas with your
Opening
kids.
night, yes, I'll be there.
Okay, so are we. And I think it's going to be nothing more than a repeat of the first one done up in today's technology and more water scenes. But still, my 21-year-old, who's my youngest one now, said something last night to me. He said, "Dad, I've been waiting 13 years for this. I was like 8 when the other one came out. I can't wait."
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, he's right. He's right. Anyway, hey, Marty, I want to wish you and the whole Netography team continued success. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay in touch with us. I'm sure, hopefully in 2023, maybe we'll see each other in person.
Yeah, for sure.
Or Black Hat or something.
Yeah, we'll be on the conference circuit for sure.
Us too. We'll be doing live videos there, so maybe we'll have you in. But if not, you always have an open invitation to come on here, talk whenever you'd like.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Alan. Happy holidays to you and your team. Appreciate talking to you always. It's a fun conversation. So, let's definitely see if we can get together in the coming year.
Absolutely. All right. Marty Rush, Netography, Atomized Network, Deed. Check it out. Marty, be well. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. Our guest is actually, he's a returning guest for Techstrong. I think he hasn't been on though with us in maybe a year. Let me introduce you to Nate Stewart from Cockroach TV. Hey Nate, welcome back.
Alan, thanks so much for having me on your show.
It's a great thing to have you on. I'm sorry it's been so long since you were on. It's not like Cockroach TV hasn't been doing anything, but you know that's how these schedules work. But in any event, hey man, welcome. Nate, before we get into kind of the news of the day, I wanted to give our listeners, viewers, a little bit of background about you and the company. So if you don't mind, let's hear a little bit about Nate Stewart.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nate Stewart. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Cockroach Labs. So what we do at Cockroach Labs is we make a distributed SQL database that makes it easy to build applications and services that are resilient, that are scalable, and extremely low latency. And we work with some of the largest and fastest growing companies in the world to really help them streamline their modernization and their new app development initiatives.
Yep. And so Nate, I kind of know a little bit about the Cockroach story, but let me play shill here for a bit. So in a world where we hear about new databases or new types of databases pretty frequently, time series databases, GraphQL databases, and NoSQL, SQL, where does Cockroach fit into that kind of framework?
Yeah, so we're a relational database, a SQL database, and SQL databases have been around since the 70s, and we're actually in a really interesting point in time because initially relational databases, they always ran on a single, very big machine, right? If you wanted to get more customers running on your platform, you had to get a larger and larger machine, and eventually you run out of machine, and things get very, very expensive very fast. And so what happened about a decade ago is you start to see the NoSQL movement where people are saying, hey, we have to scale. There's too much data. Data is exploding. And we have to get out of the single machine world and start to spread things out. The challenge with the NoSQL approach was that you had to give something up to scale, right? So they couldn't figure out how to keep transactions, how to keep SQL, and also get the scalability and the resilience. And so that's why it's NoSQL. And that, pros and cons. There's pros and cons with everything. But what was the breakthrough for us is that because computer science continues to evolve, because people realize that it's very helpful to developers to be able to have SQL where you can write less in your application tier and rely more on the database. People were still trying to figure out, can we do both? Can we scale out while also having transactions, while also having SQL? And that's what you get with distributed SQL. So Cockroach DB is the result of some breakthroughs in computer science that really sidestep the trade-off between scalability and SQL.
I love it. So it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too, right? Where you still get your SQL, but you get your scalability. And I don't know if the audience has figured out, but I know we've covered this in time past. Cockroach DB, of course, got its name from its survivability, right? They always say even after a nuclear holocaust, only the cockroaches will survive. And it's a great take on that. Before we jump into, we're going to talk about a new release here, but for people who want to get more information on Cockroach and go check it out, what the URL?
CockroachLabs.com.
CockroachLabs.com. And then the relationship between Cockroach DB and Cockroach Labs.
Cockroach Labs is the company. Cockroach DB is one of our products.
Got it. I just want to just lay in the groundwork here, Nick.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's jump into today's news.
Sure. So this is one of my favorite releases ever because of how it came together. So we're finally at the place where we've moved beyond having dozens of customers to hundreds of customers. And what that means for a database company is we get more feedback, but we also get more opportunities to ruggedize and strengthen the core platform because people are using it in many different ways. There's no shortcut to building a distributed SQL database. And what that means now is that we have a release that we're really proud of. It's CockroachDB 22.2. And there are three main elements to this release. The first is all about developer productivity. In a world where everyone's trying to find more efficiencies, how can you get the same engineering team to be twice as productive, 3 times as productive? And so what we're trying to do is how can we improve the SQL capabilities to, again, give developers more time back? In this case, we took one of the most popular features of Postgres, which is called user-defined functions, where you can run code directly in the database rather than having to rewrite it and manage it at the application tier. Again, it gives developers more time back. The other exciting update is our approach to building real-time applications. So you can imagine you have your database, it keeps all of your customer records in sync, but you want to run analytical queries. How much money did I make in the last month? How much money did I make today? Traditionally, you'd have to do that in a one-off process. I'll run the report every night at 1 a.m. Now, with CockroachDB, we can stream those updates to your analytical system and they can run in real time. This is very powerful for customers like DoorDash. They have their DashMart, convenience store platform, and they use this capability to do real-time inventory management. Because you can imagine you go on your mobile app, you're trying to buy some potato chips, you put it in your cart, you check out, and then it's not there. No one likes that. And so with CockroachDB's real support for real-time application, now DoorDash can do real-time inventory management. And in this release, we made that significantly more efficient. Again, getting more with less. And then the last big part of this release is all about operator experience and how can we help people run these increasingly large distributed clusters in production. And so we launched this capability called Intelligent Insights, because from the point of view of the developer, it looks very much like a Postgres database. But again, behind the scenes, we have many machines moving data all around the world. And so when things may slow down, or if things are more expensive than you would think, you need a different playbook for getting back into a good spot. And so rather than relying on professional services or documentation, those are both great for Cockroach, but we're trying to figure out how can we help the database give you hints on how to fix things. A specific example, Johanna Labs is one of our great customers. They're in the IoT space. It's a spin out of Panasonic. And they had too many indices or indexes, which makes queries fast. And what that means in practice is that their database was too expensive. And so now CockroachDB could say, hey, you have 3 unused indices, and this is costing you X amount of dollars. Maybe you want to remove one of those. And that's the type of capability that we've built into the product itself. So those are the 3 main updates from the latest release.
Absolutely. Hey, we jumped right into it, and you were so excited about these features, I didn't want to stop you. But I need to kind of frame a little bit for the audience. What is this latest release? What's it called?
CockroachDB 22.2.
So it's 22.2. It's not. So in your naming convention, is this considered a major release, or it's just a point release?
This is a major release. So our naming convention, the first set of digits is the year, and then the second set of digits is the number of major releases. So this is the second
major release for this year. Excellent. And it's available right now for people who want to go check some of this stuff out. And,
exactly.
If you go to cockroachlabs.com, or do you go to CockroachDB for this one?
So you go to cockroachlabs.com, and then you can either download the binary, or what's most exciting, get started in our cloud product. Because again, distributed systems, lots of machines, we wrap all of our releases in this broader cloud platform. So you can run data intensive workloads at a fraction of the cost using our management infrastructure. So again, just less operations, more time to focus.
Yep. DB is a service, baby. So Nate, this was released, if I'm not mistaken, December 6th.
Yes.
And so it's been out a couple of weeks. What kind of feedback have you been hearing from people?
Yeah, the user-defined functions in particular was one of our most requested features. And it's one that we held off on building for some time, because initially with CockroachDB, people were using it to build their next generation applications. And for those, people were relying more on microservices and, trying to spread things out and federate things. And what happened was, once people saw that CockroachDB actually did deliver on distributed SQL, that was the aha moment for a lot of people. And they're like, hey, we have all of these Postgres workloads. Let's just migrate them onto Cockroach. And one of the barriers was the support for user-defined functions. And so with the release of that has unlocked tremendous potential for people to modernize even more of their application tier. And what's really exciting, in their data tier as well. But what's really exciting about our approach to user-defined functions versus what you'd see with, say, Postgres is we are building it from the ground up to run in distributed environments. So now it's not just going to be user-defined functions on one machine. It's going to become distributed data functions, where you can have these functions running close to data, spread around the world, close to your users, all running on that same shared CockroachDB infrastructure.
It's cool. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you think as we were taking this full circle back to the beginning of our conversation, we're doing this on a kind of, I don't want to use the word infinitely scalable, but highly scalable SQL-based server. Because one of the things, Nate, that I've been seeing, I have a good seat right here. I get to talk to a bunch of people. One of the things I'm seeing is even these, these newfangled killer databases like Graph or Time Series or what have you, a lot of them, perform functionality and all this over here, but they have sort of SQL backends, if you will, right, where they work on SQL. And so, it to have a Cockroach as that SQL can only help them with their scalability, because a lot of them don't work unless you have really big data sets to begin with, right? I mean, that's where their value comes in. So it's an interesting, relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually see new databases that are being developed that are being built on CockroachDB. Starburst, for example, this is a analytical database as a service. Mm-hmm. They use CockroachDB under the hood to manage a lot of their metadata, make sure that their database is always available. So we are seeing that the foundation that we're providing is spurring the next wave of innovation in the database space.
Absolutely. Hey, Nate, we're about out of time, but I just want to remind people again, it's Cockroach 22.2.
Yes.
And you can get it right on Cockroach Labs. You can download the binary and set it up yourself. But, if you want to just get up and running, use the SaaS version, man, and it's there and all ready to rock and roll.
Exactly. We're seeing tremendous customer traction. We've used that to improve the product, and you can experience it all on our cloud platform or download the binary.
Nate, it's great seeing you. Now I understand why I saw you about a year ago. That was probably 22.1 or something, and now we're at 22.2. Let's not wait till it's 23.1. Keep us posted on what's happening with Cockroach, okay, man?
All right. Thanks so much, Alan.
All right. Nate Stewart, Cockroach Labs, CockroachDB here with the latest release, 22.2. We're going to take a break on Techstrong TV, and we'll be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com
and Techstrong.tv.
Previously on Engineering the Change.
There's a lot of startup and tech companies here, and they're all really hungry for, good dev talent.
Hey, I'm Donald.
My name is Carly.
Hi, my name is Stephanie.
The next 10 weeks is going to be really rough.
This is probably one of the most amazing journeys you're going to embark on.
We've been doing basic JavaScript, functions, variables, loops.
You have to celebrate it. Take a moment when you solve a problem to actually celebrate and get excited. And it's cool, like you see somebody across the room do that and you're like, yeah.
My high this week has been actually starting, because I know this is the beginning of the rest of my life, as corny as it sounds.
You moved out of strength.
So it was great.
It's been awesome. Everybody here is awesome. The whole experience so far is awesome.
This week, our scholarship winners get a reality check and are forced to step it up as they delve deeper into more challenging coding projects.
So of all the students, Stephanie is probably the most difficult for me to get a temperature read on.
One of my struggles is not being so hard on myself when I don't understand something.
Stephanie is very quiet in class. She's very focused.
That's pretty cool that I've been able to expand my mind to be able to accept different ways of doing something.
She's on the right track.
Donald came to me earlier today and told me that he felt like he was drowning.
I've still, got to grasp the fundamentals fully.
Donald is another story. He is honestly starting to scare me a little bit.
And right now he's definitely in, I'd say in the bottom 4 or 5. As much as he's struggling, Donald really, really wants this. Carly's going through a lot personally right now. Her house burned down in Haiti twice in 24 hours.
I lost everything. And over that, I come here, I study, and I will make it.
She is very strong.
If I had to pick someone as the strongest student in the class, 100% I would pick Carly.
Carly, Donald, and Stephanie are beginning to struggle with the high expectations and quick pace of the class.
Last week I thought was hard, but this week I really had a moment where I was like, can I really do this?
I think I'm doing very well in creating APIs and creating projects with Firebase.
I would say the most important thing is that you can't just specifically focus on just one program. It has to be you have to at least focus on I would say the most important ones are SQL and MongoDB.
I know that I am learning and I am retaining, so I just got to give myself the grace and the time to actually be able to continue to consume the information.
When you have a student that's asking really basic fundamental questions or can't answer fundamental questions, then of course we're concerned.
We do this thing where every Friday we have a instructor retro, where the staff sort of get together and talk about the students that are doing good and those that sort of need attention. It was a surprise to me when Dano was mentioned.
He did very, very poorly. The lead instructor, he pulled Dawn aside and said, hey, you either gotta put in way more hours and work twice as hard so you can make it to the end, or you can decide to maybe do this another time. Unfortunately, he kind of just gave up and quit.
In an unexpected turn of events, Donald has dropped out of the class. The 2 remaining scholarship winners, though stunned, double their efforts and vow to finish strong.
I feel more confident. Thanks to Todd.
My highs are really just feeding off of energy in the classroom, because sometimes when I feel down, like I don't understand, and someone will just say something and it'll just kind of bring me back up.
Everybody loves Wade.
Wade. So that's my high, just being around you all, and it pushes me.
From the first cohort till now, I still think, they're all superstars.
This is Techstrong TV.
All right, we're here. We're here at AWS reInvent 2022 in Las Vegas at the Techstrong Studios at the Wynn. And I have the great privilege of being joined by another great guest. We've brought you a lot of great guests today, and certainly true in this case, exciting topic. Matt Butcher from Fermyon.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we're going to get into what Fermyon is doing.
You're going to try and get me to sing the Fermyon.
I told you.
Yep, you're right. You're right. I've made it in like 7 seconds in, and
Ladies
I'm singing already. Yeah.
The folks at the company are now cringing.
That's right, they are. Sorry.
It's the end of the day. You're getting a little loose. Yeah. So, Matt, tell us about yourself and tell us about the company.
Yeah. So I've been in the cloud space for quite a while. I came into the cloud space from like the Drupal content management world. And I got a job at HP right when they were starting to investigate OpenStack. And so I came in as a CMS person. And as soon as I saw what they were doing, I'm like, CMS, no, I want to do that stuff now. This kind of breakdown of we'd always up to that point, perceived the relationship between the operating system and the hardware as being kind of one-to-one. And it was like one of those experiences where it sort of breaks your brain in an exciting way. And so started doing that there at HP. Later on, moved into the container ecosystem very early. Was at a place called Revolve that was an IoT startup and got into the cloud side of IoT, and then ended up at Deus, which was building a Heroku-like, an open source alternative to Heroku. That got me into Kubernetes, and really kind of dove deeply into the Kubernetes world, created the package manager for Kubernetes called Helm, and then ended up moving on from Deus into Microsoft and spent about 5 years there. Until making that big leap into the startup world and starting Fermyon about November of last year.
Strap on that parachute and jump, right? A little bit of that.
Oh yeah. Nothing like jumping out to learn how to fly, right?
Wait, Drupal, you had me flashbacks to Joomla and a bunch of other CMSs.
Oh yeah, I was a big CMS guy. I did Joomla and WordPress, and even some of the more esoteric ones like OpenCMS, and that was my world for a long time.
That too.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about WebAssembly. A lot of buzz starting to talk about this as maybe an alternative or an extension or replacement to cloud native. Maybe we should start out with what WebAssembly is.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about WebAssembly, and this happens a lot in technology, right? You build a technology for a purpose, and then discover after the fact that the technology is generalizable and can be applied in different places. So the original intention of WebAssembly was, as kind of the name implies, was to build a compile target for different languages to be compiled and executed inside of a browser in a secure way. And I mean, this came out of Mozilla, and then Mozilla and Google and Microsoft all worked together and built this great specification for executing things safely in the browser. And I think Figma is a great example of a user of WebAssembly in the browser space. A lot of their code was written in C++, compiled to WebAssembly, and executed inside of the web browser. But the interesting thing about it is that security model that WebAssembly provides, it's got an application in a number of different places, and that's what really kind of excited us about it. But really, at the end of the day, WebAssembly is just sort of a specification for how to compile things to a platform agnostic binary format where the default security posture, and this is the really important part, right, is that the thing you're executing, you don't trust it. So when you think about the way that we run native programs, or even the way Java and .NET work, the default security posture is, well, yeah, I trust the developer, so I'm going to let them use the network resources. I'm going to let them access files on the file system. That's sort of a non-starter in the browser world, right? And when we saw features like that, where by default the runtime doesn't trust the binary, we thought, okay, that's the kind of thing that we could use. We could, pick up out of the browser and drop onto the cloud side and solve a bunch of problems that we had identified there.
Well, if we haven't learned anything from plugins and add-ons in the browsers and being in hostile territory, we haven't learned much.
Yeah.
But no, we certainly have learned a lot. So I'm just going to kind of state some basic questions first, just folks that aren't familiar with it. Is WebAssembly considered like a runtime, or is it strictly, here's how it gets compiled into an executable that already has in that compilation has built-in security mechanisms to prevent it from going wild inside your browser?
So WebAssembly was standardized by W3, the same group that does CSS and HTML. And there's sort of two parts of the standard. One of them defines how you'd compile something into the format, and the other one defines how you would execute it. And then now there are a bunch of, as happens with W3, right? There's a core standard, and then there are a bunch of auxiliary standards to say, okay, well, in this case, this is how you would expose this particular API. In this case, this is how you do threading. And that's kind of where we're seeing it now. But the specification really defines sort of how to compile it to this, assembly-ish kind of language, and then how to execute it. Similar to the bytecode and virtual machine specification for Java.
Okay, yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah,
very much so.
Yeah.
Browsers today support WebAssembly, or is this something we need to roll out yet?
All major browsers currently support it. Safari, Chrome, all the Chrome family of
WebKit.
Yeah, exactly. V8, and then the Mozilla family as well. So.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, imagine that, getting all of the browser vendors to agree on a standard and then implement it, really well.
It's
excellent. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So why WebAssembly? Why do we need it?
I think there are kind of 4 different areas where it can be applied. In Fermyon, we've really kind of zoomed in on one. But one of them is, of course, the web browser, the original case. The second one, I think, is you already touched on, this idea that we could create sort of, as one of my friends calls it, the last plugin system we'll ever need. The Envoy proxy, for example, can run WebAssembly plugins. So if you're writing proxy filter rules, you can compile them to WebAssembly and drop them in there, and you get the security model, and you get all the benefits of that, and the developer can choose which language they want to use. And if they like Rust, they can use Rust. If they like C, they can use C. That set of capabilities is really compelling in the plugin model. I think we're also seeing that in the database world as well. Third case is really kind of edge computing and IoT, so far edge and IoT. WebAssembly, one of the cool things about the standard is that you can run it in an interpreted mode, which is great for a low-powered small device, or you can run it in a kind of pre-compiled JITted mode like you would with in maybe a server environment. That's how we run it, for example. So I know BBC, Amazon, there are a couple of different vendors who use WebAssembly to build the app where you watch your TV shows. So if you're using Amazon Prime, you're running WebAssembly most likely, because then they could write a single implementation of this and then move it to your TV or your Roku or whatever device you happen to be running it on, and they don't have to maintain 1,800 different code bases to execute on all these different platforms.
That's kind of that elusive holy grail of write once, run anywhere.
That's and I think the promise of the write once, run anywhere with Java is really coming around again in a different iteration here with a different security profile, and it's kind of exciting. Then the case we're really excited about is the cloud side, right? Mm-hmm. And what we saw happening was, again, going back to the autobiography, right? I was there, saw the VMs. This was really cool. And the VM is kind of like this workhorse of the cloud, right? We can't even imagine cloud computing without virtual machine technology. And then along comes sort of so that's really the heavyweight class of computing. The middleweight comes along a couple years later with Docker containers, which provide a nice, easy way to kind of package up a segment of the file system, but not the entire image that the virtual machine has in it, right? So you get kind of this middleweight class, and it's really good at a particular set of problems. One of the things we kind of discovered that got us interested in starting Fermyon was that there were certain problems we couldn't solve with the heavyweight and the middleweight classes. And we started to say, well, maybe there's a next wave of cloud computing. Maybe there's a third category of cloud computing what kind of profile would we want? Well, we want this kind of security model. We want this write once, run anywhere kind of model. We want super fast startup times. And as we kind of hunted around the landscape, WebAssembly sort of bubbled up to the top. And we looked at that and said, okay, so this could be the kind of next cloud side technology that's going to sit alongside Docker and going to sit alongside virtual machines, but be able to accomplish some things and solve some problems that we either haven't been able to solve or have solved in expensive and inefficient ways up to this point.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you is, would we ever containerize a WebAssembly application, or is that sort of like, you're moving a step backwards by doing that?
No, I think there are actually some good use cases for containerize, just like we run containers in virtual machines. I think there are cases where the sort of the nested model can solve a problem, and other cases where you don't need the nesting model. The WebAssembly security model is great. So you don't necessarily need the security isolation that a container gets. But someone might have a reason to say, I'm going to containerize this and run it somewhere. For us, we've chosen not to go that route. And a big part of the reason is because each layer on that layer cake, adds a little bit of, it consumes more resources, adds a little bit more friction.
And if you don't need it. Right?
Yeah, adds a little bit more weight to your application, and consequently, in some cases, drives the cost up to operate it. And one of the things we're really excited about with WebAssembly is that the resource consumption is very, very thin. So when you think about a virtual machine, you're talking about a gigantic image that then requires a large amount of CPU and a big amount of memory to execute. And so again, that kind of extra large heavyweight model. Containers, a little more svelte. You can get, 25 meg container image. But WebAssembly, we can get those sizes way down to just the size of the code or the code in its supporting files. And likewise, startup time. A virtual machine takes a few minutes to start up. A container takes, a couple dozen seconds to start up. The WebAssembly, this is where we're really excited about it. WebAssembly, we targeted saying, okay, we want a startup time around 100 milliseconds. Well, turns out we can get it way below 100 milliseconds. We can actually get to the first execution of an instruction in under 1 millisecond. And that's one of the really key things that's exciting to us, because as serverless technologies as we start to understand what we can get out of them, every little bit of speed that we can squeeze out of it means we can be a little more efficient in the way we use cloud computing resources. And ultimately, you can kind of parse that out different ways, right? We want to save power. We want to be a little more eco-conscious about the amount of computing that we do and the resources it consumes. We also want to save money, and that means if you can run more stuff on fewer cloud VMs and things like that, then you're going to save substantial amounts of money.
You can keep startup time under the millisecond latency of my Wi-Fi network in the hotel. That's pretty dang good.
Yeah. It has been really fun. You get going on a startup, and you're like, theoretically, I can do this. So I'm going to tell people, we're going to do this. And then the rubber hits the road, and you have to actually prove it. And so one of our first projects at Fermyon was to say, can we build and run our very own website on this technology? And can we get it, at the time, it was into that sub 100 millisecond.
Pages, right?
Yeah. And when we, as we got things built, and February of last year was creeping around, and we started running the Google Performance Test Suite against it, we're targeting like a 90 out of 100 on the Google score, and we hit a 99 out of 100. And we went, this is faster than we thought. We were actually underselling the technology, and consequently, from then on, we started to really learn how to design this system to maximize efficiency.
So talk to us about what Fermyon then offers.
So we set out to build 3 things. And now, as of October, we've released our 3rd one. But the first one was we wanted to build a really good developer tool to make it easy for developers to get going, and easy for them to pick the language they wanted and build a quick HTTP application that would ideally be a couple dozen lines of code to get started, and then you dive straight into the business logic. Second thing, and that was Spin.
Sounds like your great microservice.
And it is. We wanted microservices are the kind of applications we think WebAssembly is perfect for. And so if we can build a developer tool that says, hey, we'll make it super easy for you to get going on a microservice, and so easy that you can get from a blinking cursor to a deployed application in 2 minutes or less. That's our guiding user story. then that's a really compelling thing to offer to developers. And if you look at why Docker was successful early on, it was because the Docker tool made it not just easy to package up things and then push it out to a registry, but actually kind of fun, right?
A lot faster.
Yeah, we got a buzz because building AMIs was hard at that time, right? And we thought, okay, well, WebAssembly, we should make it as easy as possible to build these. So Spin was our first tool. We released it at the very end of March last year because we didn't want to release it on April Fool's Day. Okay. So we're like, let's get it out the door.
Not a bad marketing move.
Yeah. And then on April Fool's Day, it trended on Hacker News. So we're going, well, I don't know. I guess that's better than...
Good intentions.
Yeah. And then the second tool we wanted to do was an open source platform that people could deploy on their own clouds and be able to try this out. And it's not, it's not the kind of thing that'll scale out to hundreds of thousands of applications, but it's the kind of thing that a team can use to deploy their first, 10, 20, 50 applications.
Kind of a reference model implementation.
Exactly, yeah. And we wanted to show people how we had stopped using Kubernetes and started using HashiCorp's Nomad Scheduler, which is just a remarkably flexible tool and allowed us to not have to build an orchestrator. And that's like a personal goal of mine. Orchestration is hard. So we released that open source platform at Open Source Summit in June of this year. And then from there, we said, okay, well, what do developers really want? What's going to get them? What kinds of things can we smooth out? How do we make this a frictionless experience for them? Well, we've been working on Spin, and that gets you going building the application. But developers tend to not want to have to set up a lot of infrastructure before they can try it.
Right.
So we said, all right, well, we think that we can do this at incredibly high density, which means we can operate a cluster at a very minimal cost to Fermyon, which is an important thing when you're a startup, right? And so we began building a kind of hosted version of the Fermyon platform, and we called it Fermyon Cloud. We just launched it. And it's in open beta right now, and it's our free tier of the platform. You can, sign in with GitHub, and within moments, again, it's part of that whole blinking cursor to deployed application in 2 minutes or less. Radu, who's our CTO, says, you really ought to point out that you can do it in 66 seconds or less. I'm going, I know, but 2 minutes for some reason just sounds catchy to me. But that's the kind of experience we wanted. So it was like, Spin for the developer, Fermyon platform for the people, for infrastructure and platform engineers who really want to try it out for themselves, but really this hosted Fermyon cloud for the developer who wants to say, hey, I built something, now I want to publish it out there and have it on the web.
I'm guessing I know the answer given your target market. If I deploy this on the Fermyon cloud, is this something... It can stay there. It's not a 90, 60 day, 66 day, whatever the number is, and then
2 minutes,
I got to buy something. But it's one of those when I get to the point that I really need the advanced features or whatever it might be.
And again, we're in the kind of open beta period. So
you're early.
One of the things we decided not to do in the open beta period, which we'll introduce, coming up early next year, was we didn't allow people to map their own custom domains to it, because we thought the last thing we want is to introduce something and then have it be unstable while people are trying to put it into production. Again, one of the pleasant surprises, like the discovering that it was faster than we thought, was discovering that actually it is a remarkably stable technology. And a lot of that is because of HashiCorp's Nomad project, but a lot of it is just because WebAssembly is a very robust, in spite of its newness, it's a very robust technology. And so even in this first month, we've started to say, okay, well, our level of concern for performance and for stability and for the ongoing maintenance of the platform is going down and down and down, and our own confidence has really grown quite a bit. So I think early next year we'll start saying, okay, the things we weren't sure about releasing in the early open beta, we're going to start rolling out, like being able to map domains and being able to store things in a key value storage and inject environment variables and things of that nature. So it's been a really exciting time. I think startup life is hard in a lot of ways, and when you get a little victory like that, it just really gets you amped up.
Especially because you can't do all the things you want to do.
Oh yeah,
it's not time, resource.
It's all
but
that. Yeah,
you do the things
trade-off.
That'll kind of progress you down the path you want to go.
Yeah.
What are the things? What does WebAssembly need next? What's it missing that it needs to evolve to?
So I mentioned there were a couple of auxiliary specifications that are making their way through W3. To me, the most important one is called the component model specification. And sort of at root what it is a specification for how you can take two WebAssembly modules and make function calls back and forth between the two. So this is sort of like the next iteration of the microservice model is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be to say, okay, well, we can compile a library to WebAssembly.
It's like a sort of a library model for microservices.
Yeah. And again, what would be ideal would be to get out of that habit where we keep having to re-implement the same exact feature set in every single programming language under the sun. There's a JavaScript version of this thing, there's a Python version of it, there's a Rust version, and instead be able to say, well, actually, it doesn't matter what the upstream language for the library was. We just built it into WebAssembly, and now whether you're writing JavaScript or Python or Rust or whatever, you can call into that same WebAssembly module. So
rather than doing like a REST call or something over the network, you're doing cross-communication.
And mediating it through the WebAssembly runtime instead of over the network. Right. And that would be, to me, that's really where WebAssembly as a technology begins to show not just that it's Java with a different security model, but that it's bringing something nuanced and really exciting to the table, and something that really has the potential to change the way that we build software right now and reduce the effort we put into duplicating things in different languages, which, you think about the countless hours that are spent figuring out why the YAML, this might be coming from personal experience, why the YAML processor in Go parses my document this way and the YAML processor in Python parses it that way.
That would never happen.
Never.
Theoretical question.
Yeah, purely. So I think that's really exciting. There are a couple other specifications that are working their way through, and I think probably the most important one is that WebAssembly doesn't have threading yet. And threading, you can do a lot without threading. Right. If you need an example, PHP has existed without threading for a very long time, and very impressive systems have been built.
PHP,
but there are things like databases. If you want to write a database in WebAssembly, you're probably going to need threading. And so the threading specification in W3 is working its way through and is looking really great. We're starting to see the reference implementation. So I think, they're moving along quickly for a standards body, and I'm excited to see those come in, because then I think with the component model and threading, I think then the entirety of what we can do with WebAssembly will really start to bubble up into these different areas where we're starting to see it used.
Mm-hmm. It seems like whenever we have a new technology or a new approach come along, that's going to supplant and replace everything else before it, which is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's true. All those things still exist forever, and this will exist too. Do you see it overtaking some applications of what we do in Kubernetes and cloud native, or is it specialized enough for, these are things you wouldn't want to do in a Kubernetes environment?
I was a big kind of zero-sum thinker for a long time, and really thinking, okay, well, in fact, when I went from the virtual machine world to the container world, the way I was approaching it was, nobody will ever need virtual machines anymore. We'll have containers.
VMware gets gone.
Yeah.
It's bigger than ever, right?
Then, the scales fell from my eyes, and I went, oh, yeah, well, both of those are going to be around forever, right? So as we got interested in WebAssembly, with a little bit of that perspective, we could say, okay, we don't need to tell the story WebAssembly is going to supplant containers, or WebAssembly is finally going to put virtual machines to rest, or something audacious like that. We could start saying, well, what's its strengths? And then what are we going to build upon those strengths? And some of its strengths, there are the current way we do a lot of functions as a service. If you get the behind the scenes view of how Azure functions or how Lambda works, it's inefficient at the core. Mm-hmm. WebAssembly might provide the alternative runtime that would do that. So is it taking something away from the VM and container kinds of solutions? Well, maybe in some of those cases, but those are cases where we've known for a long time those aren't the right long-term solutions. We needed something that would come and be able to do those more efficiently. I don't see any reason why this becomes an existential threat to either of those, but for certain, we'll start to see a new level of robustness on the kind of serverless aspect of things, because WebAssembly will be.
I was going to say, serverless sounds like an ideal environment. Maybe even a K3, K0, sort of really lightweight environment where. Do you need that infrastructure? Maybe this is a variation of that.
Yeah, and I think that's what you'll see. The cases, particularly cases where your system is constrained as a small processor, or cases where density really matters, like cloud and being able to do sort of large-scale serverless functions and packing more and more applications onto a thinner and thinner virtual machine profile. Those are cases where I think WebAssembly will really excel. But we built a game. We like to have fun, right? And I'm not going to sing "Take Me On Again," I swear. But we built a game called Finicky Whiskers. That was a game about one of my colleagues' cats who was always changing her mind about what she wanted to eat. So we built this little game about a cat that changes her mind. She wants steak, then she wants chicken, then she wants vegetables, and you're trying to click buttons: steak, 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 chicken, 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 as fast as you can to feed her as she's changing her mind. But behind the scenes, it was built out of 9 different WebAssembly microservices and a containerized version of Redis. And the reason we did this silly game was to give people sort of like that palpable experience of seeing the WebAssembly stuff working really, really fast, while also working side by side on top of a platform that's running containers and WebAssembly. And of course, the whole thing is running on a virtual machine. Right. So then we can say, look, these are complementary technologies that were going to enable us to build a new kind of application, composite application that's going to be better than what we had before. And that's really all we want. We don't need to talk in language of defeating something or supplanting something. It's just how do we make this stuff better, cheaper, faster, and so on.
Well, I'm getting the hook, which means we're having a great conversation. So, and by the way, I have it on good authority that your theme song for the company is trending on TikTok.
Oh no!
Get back to your room. So, Matt Butcher with Fermion. Right, correct. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, sure.
Great talking about WebAssembly and kind of bringing everybody up to speed. We'll be back. We've got some more great interviews today and tomorrow. So look forward to having more good conversations. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hey everybody, Mike Rothman here, General Manager of Techstrong Research, Chief Strategy Officer, Techstrong Group. We are here for another recording of the Techstrong Research Review. It's actually a special one. We are at the end of the year, so we are going to do our little Techstrong Research Review 2022 retrospective. I'm joined as always by Mitch Ashley, my pal, my colleague, my friend. Mitch, how are you, brother? What's going on?
All the same back to you, my friend. Glad to be here. As always, Mitch Ashley, CTO and also principal with Techstrong Research, working with Mike in the endless business. So this is our year-end wrap-up show. You know, we could do this for about a 3-hour show, though. Let's make it about 15 minutes, I think. We'll lose everybody.
Yeah. So, when you think 2022 has really been an interesting year, right? We, obviously for me personally, joining Techstrong and being part of the team and starting to, build out something that I think is really cool with the research group. But it's been a strange year, right? I mean, between a war breaking out and obviously economic uncertainty and, just technology evolution and a lot of M&A because you just have valuations coming back to earth. So, there are a lot of deals that have been done, but not as many as before when money was kind of free, interest rates going up. So, it's been a year of kind of uncertainty, a year of unsettling. I think that's kind of mapped into a lot of the areas that we follow. I mean, it's funny. We were talking the other day, and we had one speaker we were trying to line up for the Predict show, and we had him slotted into the cloud native environment, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't really buy into that. I don't, I don't have personal experience in terms of folks that have, kind of made this cloud native, transition, and it forced us to take a step back and go." Yeah, we live in kind of the future to a degree, right? This intersection of DevOps and cloud native, having some security with digital transformation as the catalyst for a lot of this environment. And, sometimes we kind of get caught up in the fact that, yeah, it's really cool technology and a lot of our buddies are doing some really cool stuff. It's a really big world out there, right? And when I kind of look back at 2022, I think we're going to kind of see it as the inflection point. I think we are at a point where we have to be more effective in terms of how we do things. And that forces us, to kind of start to embrace operational motions like DevOps. I think when we have to optimize cost, right, you have to start looking at, kind of cheaper options, more community-based options. And that starts to drive you towards a lot of the cloud native environments. I think there's a general dissatisfaction with the state of protection and prevention, right, in security and monitoring and everything else. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that. So, it'll be interesting. I think we'll look back and the uncertainty that we're going through now, a lot of the economic headwinds, I think are going to result in some significant innovation on the part of all technology, organizations. That's pretty much every, company now. So it'll be interesting, right? It'll be interesting. One of our themes are, kind of along those lines too, for Predict that we're doing in early January. So, it's been an interesting year. Mitch, what are your general observations on kind of the year after I, got on my soapbox for a little while?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's a year of confirming some things, and it's a year of expect anything, right? We thought the pandemic was the random thing that was going to show up. No, all the things that you mentioned, and red waves or no red waves, or what the economy and what are we going to be doing next year, and everybody kind of hitting that certain dip. I think we're kind of coming out of that. So I think the watchword is, anything can happen. You don't control most of it. So be nimble and be able to move when you need to move and adjust. And I don't want to say the pivot word, but you've got to be flexible and agile. And on the other hand, it's been a year of really confirmation of a lot of things have kind of locked into how we do stuff. I think DevOps is locked in. Not everybody is doing it. I'm not saying that, but it is the expectation that, like most people, if you're not doing it already, you're going to be doing it. And a lot of people are invested in making it happen in their organizations, and some are pretty far along. Maybe cloud native is on the horizon of potentially getting there. It's certainly got a lot of buzz in our industry. SRE has really hit home. Observability has really hit home with people. App security is really, I think, kind of landed. Now it's really, taking roots. And you and I have talked a lot about how security is morphing and changing and becoming something kind of more broader than the old security you and I know from what we started in. So in a way, we kind of have a new place to build from than we maybe even did a year ago. So to me, it's exciting. But, you and I have gone through a couple of downturns. Yes, downturns suck, but also great things come out of it, right? Yeah. People get laid off at certain companies. Forces you to be disciplined about this. And so you invest in the right things instead of, wasting money on stuff you don't need to be doing. So there's upsides to downsides. It's downturns. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing, really starting to question a lot of, kind of the bacchanalia that's happened over the last, 3 or 4 years, right? And from a technology, well, you do, or look it up. You can Google it right now, Mitch. I'll give you a sec to go and do that. Bacchanalia. But what's interesting is since most of us can be, swing a little nerdy. As you were talking, the image that kind of flowed into me was this idea that this time last year, it was kind of a new hope, right? We had all this stuff. I mean, just the market was going bonkers. I mean, it felt like, everything was moving in the right direction. And this year, it kind of feels like the Empire Strikes Back, right?
Your father.
I don't think you understand, who's your DevOps daddy, right? But, I think that there's just been kind of a reevaluation, right? A pushback on the part of, let's just take shift left. And we'll talk about this a lot during Predict. Right. There's this pushback about, do developers really have to take on all this responsibility? And, we're starting to, talk about shifting back to the right a bit, after maybe we over rotated on that front. You look at even DevOps, right? And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that folks are questioning, kind of the role DevOps has in, both how we're provisioning our infrastructure as well as how we're building, integrating and developing and deploying our code. But you have folks that are, poking at it, right? Platform engineering is going to replace DevOps. And no, there's room for everybody. And, we're calling things different things at this point. And, that's more marketing than anything else. But it just feels like, folks are chopping away at the, kind of the feel good stuff that we've been doing over the last, couple of years, which is inevitably the case. And, will it be 23? Will it be, midway through 24, that we kind of, get to the Return of the Jedi phase? I don't know, but it's coming, right? Because we see a lot of this stuff. And the thing that I always say about DevOps, right, is that when we stop talking about it, that's when people really start doing it, right? And I think we are at that stage of DevOps right now, and that it's just not that sexy anymore. It's not that exciting. But you look at what some of the companies are doing, whether it's GitHub as part of Microsoft, starting to integrate a lot of automation and deployment in there. When you look at what GitLab is doing from a growth standpoint, it's really impressive from that perspective. So you're starting to see these things, CloudBees, all these other companies in the ecosystem. You're starting to see these things, kind of start to take root and start to, hit their, massive increase in deployments. And again, to me, those are all indicative that, the machine is fighting back a little bit, but underneath the surface, the water continues to flow, downstream. And that's exactly where we want it to be.
Yeah, it really has changed things. You think about how much our world has changed in the last even couple of years. It's pretty amazing. I think looking into 2023, and we're working on Predict together, which is a great pleasure. I'm excited. January 12th, everybody join us.
January 12th.
Is there's a lot of community as well as elevating disciplines within our organizations, right? Ops isn't just the, whatever headed stepchild, right, in the background, and we always throw stuff over to it and they just got to suck it up. Right? They're applying engineering discipline. They've got respect, and open source has moved into a whole new phase. And I think about the open telemetry and how many tech companies have given up agents to adopt OTel, or at least combine it with their own. And, you don't see that very often. And so I think there's a real community of wanting to share and work together. Maybe it's because we're all been stuck on Zoom and not being able to work side by side. But I think that's one of the things that I'm interested to see how much that'll accelerate. I mean, we could talk about all the tech stuff, but it's the people that make it happen, right, Mike?
It is the people. And it'll be interesting for me to kind of see as we go into 23, which companies are going to hit the gas on digital transformation, right? And which ones are going to pull back. And ultimately, we're not going to know for a couple of years which decision is right. But you're going to see a bifurcation, right? I mean, there are just some companies that have made significant investments, and they're probably questioning those investments because, by the way, it's hard, right? It's hard. It takes, consistent effort over a long period of time. It takes the reality that not everything is going to go as you had hoped, and that you're going to run into some challenges in terms of what your digital transformation efforts are going to be. And some companies, kind of when things get tight, they're just going to, again, circle the wagons and do what they do and what they've always done. Whereas you have other companies with more of a growth or an innovative mindset that are going to lean into it, knowing that, that survival for them is at stake. And that really is the discussion. So it'll be interesting just to, again, see how that shakes out, right? See which of the organizations continue to make significant investments, even though it's going to be difficult, even though they're going to have to tighten their belt in other areas. you know, and see how that kind of ripples through the rest of the environment, right? You know, how's that going to impact, again, the development tools and the processes that you know, kind of have driven that? How's that going to impact, you know, the adoption of, you know, some of these new technologies and open source, you know, capabilities? How's that going to impact, you know, our protection strategies and our monitoring strategies? And, you know, what are we not going to be able to do, you know, from a security standpoint, because we've got to continue to, you know, invest in the infrastructure or the change, you know, agents or projects that will represent that kind of transformation within the organization. So you know, I kind of get this way every year, right? You know, like, oh, a lot of stuff happened. It's really cool to think about, you know, what's going to happen in the future. But it feels to me like, you know, this transition from 22 to 23 is going to be, you know, a little bit, you know, one, bumpier, right? But two, a little bit more impactful. And I think that the decisions that a lot of organizations are making this year, right? You know, really the first half of this year are really going to either, you know, kind of set up a company for prolonged sustainable success, or, you know, we're going to be digging, you know, ditches for these folks, you know, kind of within 2-3 years beyond that.
It does have kind of a get real feel to it, right? It's you know, kind of it's not getting down to just brass tacks and not looking to the future. It's doing both, but it's sort of you know, you're not trying to do everything. You can't follow all paths, right? You've got to pick a path, a couple paths. You know, what's strategic, what you need to do tactically, and you know, whether you're rebuilding or rethinking supply chains, or, you know, jobs coming back to the U.S., or, you know, working more internationally and dealing with, you know, so many different kind of recovery paths of different companies and different countries. There's some strategy to it, but there's some luck to it, Mike. Let's face it. You know, I wish I could say all the good decisions that I've made were because I was smart. I think maybe 2% of them were because of that. So
me too, right? I mean, a lot more luck than it is anything else.
It is. Timing and luck is so much of it. So that, I think that's, you know, when people make bets, when companies make bets, whether it's technology or strategies, I think this is what you're referring to, is it's exciting to see what happens, what's going to happen, what's going to take hold, what's going to prove to be the right strategy or one of the right strategies. And maybe the outcome will be different than any of us thought, but the outcome is good versus one that we have to pull back on.
Yeah. So let me put you on the spot, Mitch. Let's just pick one thing that happened in 2022 that you think is going to reverberate for a number of years. I mean, just water it down. And again, I know there are many, and I know it's an unfair question, and I'm not even going to apologize for it, because you know, part of the idea is, you know, let's see what you come up with when given a very difficult, you know, question off the cuff.
Well, you know, I've felt for a long time that we've been sitting on our heels in security. We've just been doing the same stuff a new way with a new product, with a new company. And, you know, the vulnerability management stuff that I built in the early 2000s, all that stuff didn't seem like anything really innovative have happened. I don't need to give credit due where it is due, but I think we're at an inflection point where now security has got a much wider field to play in. It's in the software, and it's not just infrastructure. It's up the stack, right? And into the application. It's into APIs and things like that. I think that is potentially, you know, game changing for how we can secure application. I'm not saying it's going to be easy and it's all of a sudden going to get fixed.
Right.
But what we were doing wasn't making it much better every year. We're just kind of, you know, over rotating on the same strategy. So I think that'd be my biggest thing. I think that's impactful over my career anyway. So now you need to, you're easy at predicting this stuff. So you probably won't feel to get the pressure I do to make such a statement, but what are you thinking about, Mike?
You know, it's interesting because, and I love that one, Mitch. I mean, I really do think that, you know, kind of after decades of struggle in terms of, you know, getting any kind of visibility or enterprise type support for application security, I'm not going to say we're done, but I do think that, you know, kind of things are moving in the right direction. There's still resistance. There's still a lot of, you know, kind of pushback because of the, wacky incentive system. But I think enough people understand how important that is that, we are going to continue to see slow, steady progress on that front. To me, the most impactful, thing that happened in 2022 happened around identity and access management. Right. And what you had is you had a number of actually pretty substantial public companies that were taken private by Thoma Bravo. And, whether it's SailPoint or Ping Identity, and a couple of years ago they had done, kind of Centrify, and now it's Delinea, which is really on, kind of the secrets management and some directory operational, type stuff. And when you start to see this transition that we're making to whether it's public infrastructure, open source infrastructure, stuff that's cloud hosted, however you want to frame it, IAM really becomes the central point of how you both provision and protect most of the things that you're doing. And a lot of really interesting assets are now, kind of within a private, public, private equity type of environment. So to see, kind of how they invest for growth, what are they going to fold in? Is it really about, let me go and win this market? Is it about, I'm going to consolidate all this stuff and, take the fact that, again, SailPoint has a whole bunch of enterprise customers and Ping has a whole bunch of enterprise customers. And, we're going to put them together. We're going to streamline it. And we're going to, run this thing for profitability at the expense of growth. I don't know. Right. Because I see IAM as such a huge opportunity, to really establish, kind of the trendsetter, right? The leader in the space. And it'll be interesting to see again how these assets kind of come together, how they start to collaborate, and really start to leverage kind of that common platform that Thoma Bravo has built to see where that goes. So to me, that was really an impactful, thought-leading, potentially game-changing, and I really hate that word, right? But something that can really kind of change the viewpoint and outlook of the entire kind of structure that we're doing, and it's kind of controlled by one investor now. So that, to me, that was interesting. That was impactful. It's going to be, again, very curious to see how that shakes out, because and again, we'll talk about this at Predict too, but IAM is really kind of just a center piece to what we have to do in order to kind of enable this next wave of innovation, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle that.
And there's an interesting intersection between both of our game changers, if you use that word, because IAM isn't just about people identities, right? We used to just talk about machine to machine. Well, we're talking about APIs. We're talking about all up and down the stack identity, Internet of Things identity. All of it is identity, right? Secrets and management or authentication, et cetera. So there's kind of a cool intersection. Just a quick story. I was at a conference. This is pre-pandemic, where a major company, a coffee company who has lots of stores that I frequent, starts with Star and ends with Bucks. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. One of the security executives, we were talking about strategy of how do you get engaged with software groups. And long story short, this individual said, we just went to the cloud and we worked on IAM, and we put the IAM infrastructure together in the cloud. And we told all the apps, whenever you want to go, this is done for you. Build from here. And all of a sudden we're engaged because everything has IAM in it, right? And I thought, that's pretty brilliant. That's great. Now, maybe we'll see more of that, or even better strategies like that. But I agree with you. It is central to everything
that we're doing. So, again, as you can tell, folks, right, we're excited about where things are going. We're excited about the future. Yes, it's going to be bumpy, but it always is, right? There's a decent amount of gray hair, kind of on this panel, and probably even a little bit more experience on that front, which means we've kind of seen this. We've done this. This is not our first rodeo from the standpoint of understanding how to, navigate through a downturn. So yeah, it is. We are going to have periods of bumpiness over the next, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 quarters on that front. But as you said, I really like that framing, right? Kind of finding the upside in the downturn. I think that's, that really is the way to frame, I think what we need to do in 2023, and really focus and streamlining efforts, right? I think many of us got, kind of a little bit overbuilt, right? A little bit lazy from the standpoint of driving things. We just thought it was a little bit too easy. And yeah, we've been around too long to know that was, and I should have seen it coming earlier, but you never do. It feels too good, when
you
when
just
it's
don't
going
know
on.
when, right?
Yeah, you don't know when, and you're just like, but hey, I'm gonna enjoy it now. And it's like, oh crap, I don't enjoy it when everybody's
when
getting
we'd
laid
be
off.
buying our own island somewhere. So yeah, that's that's a whole nother scope.
Exactly. So with that, I want to thank everybody for playing along with us. This year we're going to do a lot more cool stuff, both within the review and the Techstrong research next year. We will see you in early January, right? January 12th. Predict. Don't mess with it. We're going to have a whole bunch of trend documents that'll be, kind of consumable from that standpoint. We're going to introduce, a couple new pulse meters that we're working on right now, some other research initiatives that we have going. So it's going to be an exciting time for us, for Techstrong Research, and hopefully for you guys too. So with that, Mitchell, have a great holiday. Be safe, enjoy time with the family and whatever else you plan to do while we are out and recovering and recharging over the next couple of weeks. And we will see everybody in early January.
We'll see you all soon. Same to you on the holiday, and thanks for everybody for following along with us. We do appreciate the feedback and engaging with you. So be safe, everyone. We'll see you in 2023.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everybody. Mike Rothman here with another interview for Techstrong TV. I'm really excited to be joined by Ido Gino, who is the founder and CEO of Rapid. You may know them as Rapid API. They've gone through a whole rebranding and probably paid a crap ton of money for a new domain. And that's the way things work. In today's world, you gotta have the domain in order for it to be real. Ido, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. We're actually still on rapidapi.com.
Oh, rapidapi.com. All right. So I didn't mean to, some other Rapid company, rapid.com will be like, who are these API people coming to, find us from that standpoint? So we want to make sure we're clear about that. Rapidapi.com, and we'll do the contact information, later on. So, welcome to the show. Hey, why don't you explain? I know you were on the show a little while back, but why don't you kind of refresh everybody's memories about you, your background? I know that's pretty interesting, as well as what the company's about and what problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, definitely. And it's great to be back on the show and have a conversation today. As you said, Ido, CEO and founder of Rapid API, now Rapid. I still trip over that a little bit. I spent the last 6 years building Rapid, and today we kind of power the largest API hub in the world, helping developers discover and connect to public APIs. And also helping organizations, at the point where they have hundreds or thousands of different APIs that they want to manage internally and kind of help their developers collaborate on, but also exposed to partners, customers, and third parties that kind of want to extend their platform. We help them set up their own API hubs where they can centralize and manage all those different APIs. I actually started my career as a software developer at been as a kid, even pretty excited about building software, building games, building applications, and was kind of exposed to this amazing world of, APIs, is really becoming the fundamental building blocks for software and seeing the power that APIs have in empowering developers to create software faster and create much stronger software. And that's what kind of led me down this path of building we always say if APIs are the Lego pieces, we're the Lego store. So building the Lego store for APIs.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to kind of describe it because, and I've been doing software for a long, long time, right? And nowadays it's less about, kind of building the software and more about assembling different pieces from, a bunch of different public services. Obviously, open source libraries are big, cloud native infrastructure, but, kind of integrating all these things together via, kind of APIs really seems to be the way that applications are going at this point. So what are some of the problems that folks will run into, kind of when they first start dipping their toes into API-centric, architecture and design and development that, Rapid is helping to solve?
Yeah. And I think to your point, you're actually spot on. Like we talk a lot about how software today is less about building from scratch and writing code from scratch. And it's more about composing different pieces of software, be it cloud infrastructure, open source libraries, and a lot more now APIs and connecting to existing services. And this is kind of where you see developers now spending 30 to 50% of their time doing API integrations in their application. So it's taking a more and more of their work is actually invested in building on APIs. It's also, to a pretty great extent, becoming a requirement, because as the complexity of software increases and you see consumers becoming more and more demanding in what they expect software to be doing, you have to be able to leverage APIs because you just couldn't build to those requirements and fulfill those requirements from scratch. We're even seeing that, AI and, things like GPT-3 and machine learning are becoming, right now they're still very hip and new. I bet you in a few months or a few quarters, integrating with AI and having AI capabilities in an application is going to become table stakes. It's going to become something that everyone needs to do. You can't build that from scratch as an individual developer or even as a small to medium startup. So integrating with APIs that give you those technologies and those superpowers is going to be something that you have to do. But kind of back to those 30 to 50% of the time that developers use on building and integrating with APIs, we, in a nutshell, make it easier to discover the right APIs. So kind of the search engine around APIs, make it easier to see the documentation and understand how those APIs work. And we always quantify it. If you're kind of familiar with the API lingo, when you make a successful API request, you get a 200 response code. So with Rapid, we are really focused on making sure that time to 200, or how long it takes developers to make a successful request, is as short as possible. And that empowers developers to be more productive. And then helping organizations better think when, they're suddenly relying on hundreds to thousands of APIs, what those APIs, how they're performing, and were there any security or compliance gaps that need to think about.
That's exactly right. So I've spent the bulk of my career worrying about how people are going to get killed every day using technology, right? Not literally, but kind of from an attack standpoint. And that's the thing that really strikes me looking at it from an application security and compliance perspective, which is, I'm integrating all of those, different kind of components that are there. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know what code is in there. I don't know what, if I send data to it, I don't know, ultimately what's going to come back. So, that vetting process ultimately becomes very important as you're starting to deal with customer data, right? And starting to leverage, some of these, newfangled services. You mentioned API or AI, right? That's really cool. Some of the stuff that you can do with, having the machines, kind of taking a look at stuff and assembling information a lot faster. That's great, but you got to give it a seed, right? And what does that seed actually result in? So the whole compliance and security thing is something that I think is absolutely critical to continue to build trust within, the whole API economy.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you when we were kind of chatting before this show, I just came back from a conference in Paris and API days, and I got to speak to a lot of technology leaders and kind of architecture leaders in a lot of large European companies. And, they're very concerned about GDPR and data sovereignty and they kind of where the data of their users go. And a lot of them are now realizing, when you kind of have developers just going out or adopting APIs, that actually creates a huge liability where you don't know where those APIs are running. You don't know what they're compliant with. And even internally I've talked to a few companies where there are multinationals and they have, maybe it's a European sub, but they're trying to rely and integrate better with their kind of global parent company, but they also need to worry about where that data resides. So all of a sudden creating observability and having a system of record and a source of truth around where the APIs and where the API connections happening is becoming really critical for them.
Yep. And that's so Rapid has solutions in that area to, help people validate, kind of where the APIs are, where the data ends up being. And how do you actually go? Do you have a process to vet these things? I mean, with thousands and thousands of APIs that are listed, kind of within your environment, how do you go, and QA may not be the right term, but validate, right, that these API companies are doing, or these API publishers are doing the right stuff with the data?
Yeah, so on our public hub, it's an open platform, so anyone can go publish, sell an API there. We do have processes around, and you can kind of see them with some tags on APIs that we have, things like official. So we actually make sure and we work to kind of tag that API as this is an official API created by the original kind of API creator who claims the brand, and then verified where we check they comply with a bunch of stuff. We also let them publish their GDPR compliance on our platform. But more interestingly, because that's just our kind of public open hub, right, with our enterprise hub, when we bring that platform into the enterprise, we actually put enterprise decision makers in a position to approve which APIs can go into their own internal hub and which can't. So on the one hand, you want to make sure that we validate all those APIs and have, maybe your own organizational scrutiny around which APIs are fit for you to use. But once you do that, you can put that on an internal hub and make sure everyone knows, hey, this API has already been approved. So if you want to use that, you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole again. Just go use that API. We're signed off on it, which makes developers a lot more productive.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. It saves time, improves, security of the entire environment. Definitely a win for the developers on that front. So that's great. So you talk about it, you guys have made a lot of progress this year. Let's kind of look to the future a little bit, right? Because we're at the end of the year, and by the time this post will probably be kind of very early in 2023, right? So what are you expecting? We're obviously more APIs, right? More APIs tomorrow than are used today. So that's an obvious one, right? But in terms of some of the other areas where you think there'll be innovation or maybe constraints that customers are going to have to start to deal with, what do you really see happening in 2023 relative to APIs?
Yeah, so let me go get my crystal ball.
Well, tell me how the stock market's going to do too while you're at it. I'd love to know that.
It's either going to do better or worse than this year. I'm pretty sure it's going to be that area. No, there's been a couple of trends that that we've been looking at. I think that the biggest kind of theme that we're seeing is the API economy is taking over the kind of greater economy, and we kind of tag it as a tagline of every company is becoming an API company. But really what we've been tracking is this really interesting trend where as you look across markets, you see this bifurcation between companies that are working on deep infrastructure and providing that infrastructure as APIs. And in companies, we kind of call them consumerizers, and this is a completely made up word, but that actually take those APIs and create beautiful consumer experiences on top of them. And a few examples that I give to actually dimensionalize this, I use Apple Card all the time. Apple has this phenomenal financial product, but they didn't actually create a credit card offering. Goldman Sachs has all the financial infrastructure. They just consumerized it and made it into a beautiful experience. Same thing with Robinhood and stock trading. It's backed by companies like Citadels and other that do all the stock brokering under the hood. They just create a great consumer experience around it. You even see startups, again, we talked about AI, like Jasper, who actually deliver B2B SaaS. Yeah. They use a bunch of different kind of AI API providers under the hood. So I think that, a lot of companies are thinking about our industry is going to turn into an API industry where either using APIs, relying on APIs and consumerizing them, or we're the API providers. And you see a lot of legacy companies like insurance company, like financial services companies, like healthcare companies, really focusing on creating APIs because they realize, hey, we might not be the best anymore at consumerizing this. We're going to be the next disruptors. But those disruptors are going to build their solution on top of our APIs. And actually becoming an API infra player is where we can be differentiated, unique, and kind of get those gross margins.
Yep. No, that's interesting, right? Because and you see the innovation on both sides of it, right? Whereas you have a lot of new types of customer interactions that are enabled by having all of these services on the back end, right? And then the company can innovate faster and get to market more expediently because they don't have to build a lot of the infrastructure. Kind of like when startups just started adopting cloud infrastructure. Like, well, I'm not going to spend the time to build my own data center. I'll just use a cloud platform, and that enabled them to get out of that business. Now you have a number of other types of ideas that are one step removed from that relative to not having to handle a lot of the messiness and the data analysis or data kind of governance aspect of that, but really just accessing those services via the API world. And then the back end, which is how do I live in this world where, again, I'm dealing with legacy systems, right, that I can't change quickly enough. Can I provide some access to either the data or the intellectual property that we've spent dozens, if not decades of years kind of building out and enabling that. But that bifurcation, right, that would seem to be scary to a lot of different companies, right? Am I going to be at the front end? Who controls the customer? I mean, there's a lot of business, kind of model issues along those lines. But in terms of the technology layer that's going to enable that, I agree, 100% that, kind of it is going to be API driven. And that creates, again, issues in terms of accessing, managing and ultimately leveraging, these APIs within your code.
Yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned this, we've kind of been already on that trend with the cloud transition, and companies definitely thinking along the lines of what's our differentiator? This is what we're going to build. This is what we're going to do best. Everything else we're going to outsource. And I think that now, especially when money is getting more expensive, capital is constrained, we're kind of entering this recessionary environment. Companies are pressured to think even more. Where can we be more efficient? And what are the things this is, what's the unique differentiator that we have to excel in, and what's everything else that we can outsource? And we're seeing a lot of that outsourcing happening via APIs.
Yep. So anything you can tell us about kind of the plans for Rapid's platform in 2023 in terms of new areas you're thinking about, or kind of bolstering some of the capabilities that you brought to market in 2022?
Yeah, definitely. So, with Rapid, our focus has always been and remains on creating the best platform for developers to discover, connect to, and consume APIs, and empowering developers to use APIs better. There are a couple of things that we're doing to kind of extend that. All of them are things that we've kind of started and brought to market this year, and we're extending going into next year. A big investment for us is in our API studio, so helping developers create better APIs. So kind of focusing, whether we're in the public hub or in an enterprise hub, it's always an intersection point between API consumers and providers. We've invested a lot in that consumer experience, and I think today we're by far the best place for developers to consume APIs. We're also quickly becoming a really great platform for developers to build APIs. So we have our API studio where you can design, develop, test APIs, create monitoring, and then publish and monetize them into our hub. We also brought a lot of that experience into Visual Studio Code. So today, in a few months, we already kind of got the point where you can cater over 100,000 developers who use our studio experience in VS Code, and basically can do all their API design, construction, testing, and all that stuff through VS Code without ever leaving that platform. And I think the community really loves that tool. Next year, we're going to make that even more fully featured. And then with enterprise, we're serving some of the largest companies in the world. We're going to continue investing in kind of governance and observability capabilities for them. So helping them, as you kind of said, understand the risks and the exposure that they have with the APIs that they're using and exposing.
Yep. And security, I would guess, goes along with that too. And there are a number of companies that are in that space. We do a whole mess of work and research around there too, but still a huge emerging opportunity. I think it's a matter that most folks don't know how exposed they are when they start playing around with APIs. So, kind of continuing to invest in that aspect will be certainly appreciated. By the broad folks where I can beat the drum only so much, man. You guys have a lot of visibility into the developers as well.
Yeah, and I think you touch right on it. It's that kind of visibility and awareness, because there's great tools out there that provide, a lot of complex modeling around API security and API protection, where we've kind of seen some of companies struggle as in adopting those tools because they don't even know where those APIs are. That's where, it's kind of like a combined trend where companies build their system of record and identify where the APIs are, and then you can come and slap in all the security tooling on top of that.
Yeah. And I think just, kind of thinking out loud here, right? A lot of it ends up being kind of an empowerment standpoint, right? So that the security team isn't necessarily empowered to get deep into the applications and understand where the APIs are. The development team and even the operations team, right? They don't really understand a lot of the ramifications of how they're composing and building a bunch of their applications. So collaboration, I think, is kind of critical on that front. There'll always be audit out there, but really kind of at the point of development, being able to, access, again, vetted, kind of compliant APIs and information services that, handle my data with the right jurisdictions and the like. I mean, I think that, again, that's going to be increasingly important, because in this kind of environment, you do have to do more with less. You do want to be global, right? And in a lot of these global theaters, you just have different rules in terms of how you kind of access and leverage customer data. So, and again, I think that's great stuff to, kind of be out front, working with the developers, because they're the ones that really have to put this stuff into practice.
Yeah. And I think that also once a lot of companies kind of build those platforms, it empowers them to do a lot more with APIs. One of the partners that we've recently been talking a lot about our relationship with is Poly, formerly known as Polycom. And, they have been by layering in a lot of these platforms, they're able to actually create a developer-first ecosystem and expose now a lot of their APIs to developers. And we're very proud to be partnering with them and being part of the journey with them. But it's really interesting to see how every business, given the right platforming and technologies, can actually transform into an API business.
That's right. That's right. No, it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited for 2023. It'll be, I don't know much, but I think there'll be more cloud. I think there'll be more APIs, and I think there'll be more innovation. So that's a good spot to be in, since you're playing in all three of those different areas. So Ido, how do people find you guys? And I mean, we talked about it at the beginning of the show too, but kind of how do folks find you, and what should they do when they get there?
rapidapi.com or Rapid API on Google. Best way to find Rapid API. I would encourage anyone to sign up, start playing around with some of the APIs. You can build amazing stuff with, the APIs and the data we have in our platform. And I would definitely encourage anyone, if you're interested in learning more about kind of standing up your own API hub in your organization, publishing and monetizing your APIs in our public platform, or, anything else that we can be helpful with, feel free to reach out to us. It's all over the website and our platform. We're happy to kind of work with companies and leaders to be part of that journey.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you again at the end of the year, taking some time to chat with the folks at Techstrong TV. Really appreciate that time. Wish you and everyone at Rapid a fantastic holiday. And again, get ready, because 2023 should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you for taking the time for the interview, and enjoy the holidays.
You bet. All right, we'll head it back to the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Alex Ilgayev, who is a security researcher with SciCode, and we're talking about how they collaborated with the folks at CodeC to find some vulnerabilities and remediate them, and we're going to get the backstory, as they say. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hello, Mike. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
All right. How did you guys kind of come together and work on this project in the first place? How were the vulnerabilities discovered? How did they kind of surface themselves? And kind of walk us through a little bit about how the two organizations collaborated.
Yeah, sure. So first, let me introduce how modern CI/CD works as an introduction to understand the vulnerabilities and the collaboration. So nowadays, almost every organization implements CI/CD procedures to automate the development pipeline and to increase its productivity. So we are seeing a massive rise in the adoption of CI/CD technologies, and with that, we also see an increase in risks. And to demonstrate like what is this CI/CD procedure, so it could be compiling your source code, to package it maybe to some Docker container, to upload it into Artifactory, to deploy it in your cloud environment. It could be scanning vulnerabilities in your code, scanning vulnerabilities in open source package that is used by your code, and etc. And like almost everything you can think of. So one of the most prominent tools for this CI/CD automation is GitHub Actions. So GitHub is like the most popular tool nowadays to store code. Everyone knows GitHub to do its code storage capabilities. But since 2018, it's also a CI/CD platform. GitHub provides CI/CD pipelines that are hosted on GitHub servers, And this is like platform called GitHub Actions. So any user on GitHub that stores code on GitHub can define these pipelines easily by creating a workflow in a designated path in your repository, and GitHub will trigger this workflow accordingly to the workflow you put in that file. And one important fact that GitHub also delegates the responsibility for using this technology securely to the developers of this specific workflow. So during ongoing research for vulnerabilities in this open source workflows in GitHub, we found that a large number of vulnerabilities in open source project originated from a third-party vendor that it's called Codecy. So Codecy is a developer-focused startup company that helps visualize code base and assist in code reviews. They offer a freemium plan for open source projects. The thousands of projects are using it on GitHub. So for you as a project to integrate with Codecy, when you do that, they creating a new GitHub action workflow in your repository that it runs on every pull request. Whoever is not familiar with how code contribution in GitHub works, anyone can fork your project and create pull request to add a new code to the repository. So if you integrated Codecy into your repository, so whenever you create a new code contribution, this Codecy workflow helps you to visualize the added code and to help it to review it faster.
So what exactly was the vulnerability that you guys discovered, and how severe might it have been?
Yeah, so the issue is this workflow that Codecy integrated in every project and each of the thousands projects that we found has several configuration issues, and together with vulnerability in the packages that were run in that workflow, if you combine this together, it disables any user to execute code on the build pipeline of any repository that's using this workflow. And the victim list of these repositories contains some of the most popular projects on GitHub, including Free Code Camp, which is the most popular and most starred project on GitHub, who was using Codecy as well. And so the potential impact of this, first, because we're talking about open source project, they're open to everyone, to every user on the internet, and every user could actually fork the project and attribute some code and trigger this workflow and execute code on the build pipeline of the vulnerable project. So this could lead into two severe consequences. The first one, because the workflow was running with high privileges as a configuration, this is one of the configuration issues we found. The potential attacker could contribute code without permission into the project, into the repository. So whenever he managed to execute code, he could also insert any code he wants into the project, and potentially insert backdoors or malicious Trojans and cause SolarWinds-like scenarios for that project, which could lead into millions of victims, the victims of this specific project. And the second severe consequence for this code execution could be to leak and exfiltrate some very secrets and sensitive tokens that the repository is using, whether it's deploying to the cloud or using some JFrog, Docker Hub, or any other asset he has for the CI/CD pipeline. It could fetch this sensitive token and secrets and exfiltrate them. So this is the consequences of these vulnerabilities.
Right. We're seeing a lot more attacks on the software supply chain, we think, or at least we're talking about it. But what's your sense of, are the bad guys really zoning in on these software supply chains and looking for these vulnerabilities, or is it just us trying to do an ounce of prevention before something bad really happens?
I mean, because we are seeing more and more adoption of CI/CD and to quicken and the development pipeline, so we see more and more risk on CI/CD pipelines. I mean, and it's our responsibility to find this risk and this problem, this issue that we have, and to fix them. I mean, we are seeing almost on daily basis attacks on the supply chain, and all the statistics in Gartner that show there's a rise in supply chain attacks, and we'll continue to see them. So there is an increase in attacks on the supply chain, and a lot of the focus for the security nowadays are protecting the code and protecting the open source dependencies, and we are showing that we also need to protect the pipelines and the build pipelines, because there are lucrative targets for attackers as well. For example, in the SolarWinds scenario, I mean, whenever the attacker is managed to get a foothold on such a lucrative target as a build pipeline, is a lot of assets, a lot of tokens, he has high privileges in this build pipeline. It could cause a massive damage into this project and reach millions of victims for that.
Who's responsible for securing these open source projects in your perspective? Because there seems to be a debate between whether it belongs to the maintainers or the consumers of the software, because the maintainers are like, well, we gave it to you for free and we did the best we could, and there was only 6 of us and we can't do everything. Or, or the consumers need to be more responsible for what they're using, what versions, and kind of own up to some of these issues.
This is a good question, actually. I mean, some of the it's interesting in fact that some of the one of our project that we found was actually owned by about corporates, commercial corporates, not only by individuals, maintainers. So the answer to this question is complicated. If the corporate is in charge of this open source, of course we can put the responsibility for securing on him. But when we're talking about the individuals, maintainers, so the solution there isn't a good solution, because the resources are very limited. But we are trying as a psychod, and I'm as a researcher to educate as much as I can the community, and me and as our company and similar companies that doing software supply chain security, trying to help these individual maintainers, which are doing a really great job in maintaining this open source project, to educate them, to help them, to guide them through these disclosures that we are doing, and to help to make security by default. I mean, as I said previously, that GitHub delegates the security for these workflows mainly on the developers, and it causes that we're finding a lot of vulnerable workflows. But we're trying our best, and I'm sure that the maintainers of this project are trying their best to secure them. And we should cooperate together like we did with Codesy, which isn't a security company, to create these workflows and to secure the software supply chain as much as we can.
Do you think as we go along with all of this and people start focusing on this, that we might see greater adoption of best DevSecOps practices, and maybe at the end of the day, we'll all be better off for all of this focus on the supply chain all of a sudden, because we'll mature our development processes?
Yeah, I think we already were seeing this maturity. I mean, we're seeing a larger amount of compliances and standards out there. There's a SALSA that Google pushes us forward, which is a software supply chain level for software artifacts, which should increase the integrity level of software artifacts and de facto improve the security posture of the software supply chain. I'm as a researcher myself, I do see a more a maturity in these terms. People, the project that I report, my vulnerabilities are reacting almost immediately to the reports. They understand the severity. I didn't have any single case in which my reports were declined because if in importance, they already understand the importance of protecting software supply chain. And I do think that we see this increase in maturity in protecting this, because if people understand, people see this, the attacks, everybody knows SolarWinds, everybody knows Log4j. There's no negligence in this. Yeah, and I see this. I see the maturity better than a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Do you think as we go along that the relationship between security teams and developers will improve, or are we going to do this in kind of isolation from each other? But what exactly does the security team add to this equation? Because it seems like the weight is shifting left to the developers. So what is the right role or balance between these folks?
Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, there was always a tight tension between developers and security teams. I was in both places, you can say. I was a developer once, and now I'm more looking from security perspective. I think the best way to say it, if we cooperate, work together, we can achieve great things, but not always works like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. I don't have a good answer to this. I don't know if there's a major difference between software supply chain and other security industries. For this, it's a tension that happens in all the security categories, more standard security, besides software supply chain. I think there will be this tension will keep going on, but I do see more security orientation for developers than before, mainly because of DevSecOps, which throws more of the responsibility to the developers to secure their workflow. So there is an increase of security demands, security perspective for developers more than before, but it's not we still have security teams in place which should look from security perspective on entire organization. This will stay the same. Yeah.
All right. So what's your best advice to folks at the end of the day? What's that one thing you wish that they would all kind of wake up and start doing more regularly to kind of improve this overall situation that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, so maybe the best advice I can give is awareness. Both for organizations and maybe individuals who develop software or do security. I mean, you should be aware. You should be aware of the various risks you have in using modern CI/CD tooling. We adopted these technologies very quickly. These are really great technologies, and we're allowing them to develop it, to innovate faster. But with every great technology, it's come with a security risk. So they should be aware from this security risk, and we should handle them properly. This is the best advice I can give.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. We need a little prudence, I guess, when it comes to how we're using open source software, and check all those versions. Make sure you're not using something that came out of some illegal repository somewhere else that someone's trying to trick you into using malware or whatever. But think twice and, or as they used to say, measure twice and cut once. Hey, Alex, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, we're here with Lucas Gentili, who's the CEO for Loft Labs, and we're talking about a new project that they've, I guess, donated to the CNCF, and it's aimed at developers. So we're going to jump into what that's all about right now. Lucas, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Mike.
All right, so you donated a thing called Dev Spaces to the CNCF. What exactly is that, and what impact do you think this is going to have?
Yeah, so DevSpace is a developer tool. It was the first open source project that our team has started working on all the way back in 2018, even before we actually started the company. It was mainly my CTO and me starting out building this project to simplify our own, developer experience and workflow with Kubernetes. And the step that we're taking right now is, handing it over to the CNCF. So to give it like a neutral home, to make sure that the governance is in the hands of the Linux Foundation rather than, in the hands of a single company. And that's essentially the step that we took this week. And CNCF has a technical oversight committee who has to review these submissions for the so-called sandbox. And they had a meeting this week and accepted our, contribution. So DevSpace is now, of course, there's a lot of like legal processes and like handing over trademarks and all of that stuff, which will follow now. But the decision has now been made on both sides to hand over DevSpace to the CNCF.
There's a lot of focus these days on developer productivity as it relates to Kubernetes. So what exactly does this tool do to make people's lives easier? Is it I don't think it's a full IDE, is it?
Yeah, no, it works with any IDE that you're already using. So you don't need you don't need to switch everything and start with a new tool or suddenly code in the browser or something like that. Whether you use a browser-based IDE or you're using a IDE on your regular MacBook or wherever you are, right? Even if you're coding with Vim, right? It's totally fine. DevSpace is compatible with that. What DevSpace essentially does is when you fire it up, it connects to a Kubernetes cluster and then stands up your application, right? If that's a microservice application that has more than just the current project that you're in, it also pulls the other projects in and deploys them as well. Each project that you can deploy and connect to each other via DevSpace has a so-called DevSpace YAML file inside of it. It's kind of like a Docker file, right? It's like a declarative definition of how does this project, how should that be deployed to Kubernetes? Obviously, you have things like Kubernetes manifests. You may be using Kustomize. You may be using Helm. There's so many tools that you can deploy to with Kubernetes. And you essentially tell DevSpace, well, which one is it, right? Where does my Helm chart live, right? Is it remote? Does it live in a certain folder? Do I have to pull it from a Git repository? DevSpace can handle all of these things, stands up your project. Let's say you are running a Git clone, right? You have one project locally now, but you need 4 other projects. So DevSpace deploys them, deploys your current project. And then for the one that you're working on, DevSpace starts this hot reloading development workflow. And that's something really cool because that really speeds up your development workflow. Because when you typically want to work with Kubernetes and test out an application, you can deploy it, let's say via Helm, or you run a kubectl apply, right? That's great. But before you do that, you have to build an image. You have to push that image. You have to tag that image. You have to push it to a registry. Suddenly you need a registry, right? It's like there's a lot of steps involved. And then you want to make a change to that application. Well, you got to build that image again. You got to tag it again. You got to push it to a registry again. And then you got to tell Kubernetes, please update this container. With DevSpace, we're cutting this short. What we're essentially doing is we're deploying it once, right? Potentially with image building. In a lot of cases, we can actually even skip that step and just take your latest built image, right? Because then we start this hot reloading process. That means we look at your current files in your local file system or your browser-based IDE or wherever you're working. And then we look into the container and we see, oh, we need to update the container. And that's what we call hot reloading. So that It means the running container is being updated instead of a new image being produced and a new container being created from that new image. And that really boosts developer productivity because suddenly it doesn't take 10 minutes to see a change. It just takes a second. You change a line of code, your Golang or Java application is being compiled, and we just swap out that binary inside the running container.
We've been hearing a lot about how developers are intimidated by Kubernetes. And the question I would ask you is that related more towards the platform and building of the code, or is it just all the scut work that has to be done to set up the environment in the first place? And if I get rid of that, more developers will find their way to the platform.
Yeah, I think typically, the adoption path for a tool like DevSpace is that someone with Kubernetes experience starts setting up these DevSpace YAML files, right? And then everything that you need is access to a Kubernetes cluster. Whether your company gives you access to EKS and you don't really have any management or maintenance effort, you don't need to know a lot about Kubernetes. You just run a, AWS CLI command, and there you go. You have access to the EKS cluster. Or you use something like a commercial product Loft, which provisions these virtual clusters for you. Or you spin up a local Minikube, or Docker Desktop has a little button to create a virtual cluster on your laptop, right? No matter which cluster it is, DevSpace is going to work with them. And because the person who has a little bit more experience with Kubernetes and has created that DevSpace YAML file and versioned it and put it into Git, you can now just run DevSpace dev and start that hot reloading flow without being a Kubernetes expert. I think the beauty of DevSpace versus the classical, PaaS experience is, they're similar in a way, right? You run a single command and it somehow figures out how to deploy this and how to work with this and how to iterate over this. But the big difference is that you can go under the PaaS, right? Because with DevSpace, we're just using under the hood kubectl commands, Helm commands, we're connecting to Kubernetes. That means if you need to go deeper, if you need the logs, if you need to, go beyond the PaaS layer, you can still run a kubectl command, and it's still compatible with anything you're doing in DevSpace. You're not locked into one static experience. You have a transparent kind of PaaS-like layer that you're creating with tools like DevSpace on top of Kubernetes, and that really boosts, these initial steps with Kubernetes. You don't have to be an expert, right? So a good example for this is when you run DevSpace deploy and it deploys your application, and now you want to stream the logs, right? You could either now run kubectl get pods, find the right pod, copy the name, right? And then run kubectl logs, copy paste the pod name, right? That's like a lot of steps and a lot of things you already have to know. And that's just to stream the logs, right? With DevSpace, you run DevSpace logs and it's going to show you which one. It's going to ask you, which container do you want to see, right? You have it easy, like you use your keyboard up and down keys to select the one. And then it's like, do you want to follow it or do you want to just a one-time dump, right? Like it has this like interactive experience rather than being a single command tool. And I think that makes these first steps easier. But again, if DevSpace doesn't support a flag or you need to go deeper and you need to run a kubectl command, you can. And I think that makes the hurdle a lot lower to get started with Kubernetes without kind of limiting you to the tool. It actually opens you up to the Kubernetes world.
It also sounds like we're trying to strike a balance between automation and a PaaS environment that might be too highly opinionated, and therefore developers get frustrated and they don't want to be there. So, is this part of an effort to find the middle ground?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's really nailing it down. I think PaaSes have the problem that they're very opinionated and very, very limiting for a lot of folks, right? So I think the biggest fear that, especially like companies have with PaaS is that they're locking themselves into something opinionated where they may be hitting the limits of, right? Versus when you have something on Kubernetes, it's extensible, right? It's essentially, it's very, very open, right? Completely open source, of course. When you're thinking about something like DevSpace, it just creates this thin layer on top that creates a little bit better experience, but it doesn't lock you into anything. And it's client only as well. That means you could essentially, there's like 50 other developer tools out of there, right? And let's say you love Scaffold, which is an alternative product that Google is working on, right? It's another open source project. You could have a Scaffold YAML and a DevSpace YAML both in your Git repositories. And then depending on, just like every developer likes their own IDE, right? Like some people like VS Code, some people like the IntelliJ suite, right? And I think that kind of freedom is pretty important for engineers, because everybody has a little bit of their own opinionated way of working with a tool. But what we're trying to do with DevSpace in particular is be very, very open. We have a plugin system. So if you really want to change the behavior or internals of DevSpace, you can hook into that. You can customize the business logic, right? You can do a lot of things with this plugin system. And then you can also, inside that DevSpace YAML, you have a lot of freedom. Like you can read environment variables from your local file system. You can pull secrets from Kubernetes directly and say, okay, I'm apparently deploying to my staging environment because the condition says this and this in this cluster, right? So I need to change the way we're deploying, right? And there's a lot of, we've seen so many companies, so many different workflows that we know DevSpace needs to be very, very flexible. One way to achieve this, and that sounds kind of paradox, because, in a way we're trying to replace like things like make files. A lot of people write like these custom make files and they're like really hard to maintain. Nobody really understands them well. And the hurdle is really hard. But every developer kind of knows a little bit of Bash, right? So in this DevSpace YAML, we're trying to combine YAML with Bash, which sounds awful, but it actually works really well. So in DevSpace YAML, you have a construct called pipelines, which essentially lets you describe with a simple Bash-like language, right? It feels like you're writing a couple of Bash commands, right? But what you're actually doing is you're defining something declarative under the hood. And then you are referencing declarative things like Kubernetes deployments and images, right? So instead of writing all these like very bulky and complicated Bash scripts and conditions, you're actually defining declarative things, and then you're using them in a procedural language like Bash to just instantiate them. And that makes that Bash script very, very understandable and very easy. I bet if I showed you a DevSpace YAML, you would understand what's going on there without being, too deep into that particular project or, that particular tech stack that folks are doing, because it's just like 4 or 5 lines of commands, right? They're very easily understandable. They're like build image, deploy something, right? Add dependency, right? And then just a single word, understandable word behind it, because that single word references something more complicated, like an image or Helm manifest, right? But the understanding the workflow and how this application is being created is very, very easy with a couple of words.
All right. Anything that gets rid of that wall of YAML files is a good thing. But let me ask you this. If I look at the math, there's maybe, depending on what estimate you want to see, I don't know, 7 to 9 million developers that are familiar with Kubernetes, and familiar is a loose term. There's 50 million enterprise developers. So is the coming year the year where we start to see more of these developers are finally going to be comfortable enough to start really building apps on Kubernetes?
I think we are already seeing that trend in this direction. I can remember when, again, we first open sourced DevSpace around 2018. I went to a conference back then, or actually to multiple conferences, but I very vividly remember the first one where I gave a demo of DevSpace and, how this works with Kubernetes. And then the feedback from the audience was literally like, nah, DevSpace doesn't work. Like Kubernetes is for operators. We don't need this, right? And I'm definitely seeing we don't get that reaction today. People are curious. People are like, oh yeah, that sounds like we need that, right? Because I think a lot of developers, when you're looking at, Stack Overflow, GitHub, they always do these like surveys, right? And you see a lot of polls in terms of engineers wanting Kubernetes. They want to do something with it, right? I think it's just about lowering the barrier of entry for them, and they're curious, right? Engineers are inherently curious and they want to try new things, right? That's why, the JavaScript community has like 300 different frameworks to build something in the front end and back end, right? Same for pretty much every language, right? I think JavaScript is a little bit extreme of an ecosystem and being very partitioned, and there's always new things coming around. But in pretty much every language, every IDE, right? There's so many alternatives and so many new approaches. And then I think that's really a beautiful source of innovation. So we can definitely see that pull from the developers that they want to interact with Kubernetes. It's about the companies and the experts in the company and the operators of Kubernetes, right, within an enterprise, to make it accessible for them and to make it easy for them to get started, to start that learning experience. And DevSpace is definitely a tool that they can use to make that experience as, smooth sailing as possible when someone new wants to spin up something in Kubernetes and take their first steps.
All right, folks, you heard it here. That search for the Goldilocks tool that strikes the right balance continues, but you might want to check this one out because it sounds like a big step in the right direction. Hey, Lucas, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, this is Mike Rothman. Again, live from AWS reInvent. Well, not actually live, but, kind of, it's pseudo live at reInvent 2022 from the Techstrong TV studio here at the Win. I am here with Arjun from Precisely. I got it, I was almost there, man. Arjun from Precisely, where we're going to talk a little bit about data ops today. And, again, Arjun, I'm a security guy by trade, so I'm learning stuff.
We'll teach you a little bit about data today.
That's what I'm focused on, right? I'm here to learn about data ops and get a sense of, kind of the importance of contrast with DevOps and really kind of thinking about data observability. We chatted about a little bit. So lots to discuss. So, but first, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience and tell you a little bit about the company, right?
Yeah. I'd love to. So, Anjan, I'm the CPO at Precisely. So Precisely, we're a company in data integrity, and that's like three problems. Customers can't access their data. If they somehow figure out how to do that, they can't trust their data. And if they figure out how to do that, like they don't have the right data, like the external data in the right context. So we've got about 12,000 customers. We serve 99 of the top Fortune 100 customers in this space called data integrity.
Okay, so you obviously came from a number of different companies to come together to become Precisely. So
so our history is we've grown pretty rapidly. We started out with SyncSort, and we had a strategy to go. Data integrity is a thing, all the way from data integration to quality enrichment. And we kind of look like we're going to grow organically, but we're going to look at companies that fit our strategy and our ethos to win in this space. So we've kind of over time acquired data governance with Infogix and MDM with NOworks and so on. That's been part of our strategy.
Okay, so if we can kind of just take a step back and get a sense of, kind of the full life cycle of data, right? And we're here at AWS, right? So everybody's focused on S3 and EBS stuff.
Let's do it.
The reality is data's kind of everywhere, right? And can be down at the endpoints, right, on specific devices, on specific servers, and associated with the, kind of disks that are focused and connected or attached to those instances. And obviously we've got, kind of a variety of other, different object stores all over the place. So how do we first start to get our arms around, kind of where all this data is, how important it is to the organization and really start to build a process around that?
It's super important, right? Like I think you've got, like you pointed out, data is like everywhere. It's in silos, in multiple clouds. It's in like Azure, AWS. Even in AWS, like we heard in the keynote today, there's like 9 different databases. And you've got 9, at least 9 important ones, right? You got structured, semi-structured. What happens then is like, how does a company know what's important, right? Like you got petabytes of data and like what's running your business? Like what matters? Like, so if you're the CEO of a company and you got a dashboard that you run your business on daily, and like, how's that data? If that goes down, like if your customer portal goes down, do you know where that data is? Like, and who's touching that data? Like, do you have the right guardrails? So now you've got, like you talked about S3 to EBS. How's that data going from S3 to Aurora to Redshift? What happens when that data goes through? When the dashboard goes down, like the monitoring tool, so in the observability layer, they're going to tell you, oh, like it went down. Or it might be up, and your CEO might be like, well, it's not working. Something happened, like someone changed the schema, and the data is like not coming up right. So I think that sort of data observability we talked about. So I think the principles of observability and sort of DevOps, and you kind of apply them to data. It's great. Like I have a great infrastructure. If I'm not getting the return on data, like what? Like it's great, but like I need to go make my decisions. I kind of gave you a parallel in the DevOps space, right? It used to be that it would take like months to ship code. Like today, if you don't ship code daily, something's wrong with you, right? Like that's the same paradigm you want to apply to data. Why does it like you kind of have these walled gardens, like I can't access my data, I don't trust my data, and like, oh, you got to go wait 3 months to get the data I need. Like, why is that? Well, because it's like it's not secure. You got to go through the policies. Now, if you truly map your data, if you can truly have the guardrails, if you trust your data and you kind of have built a data ops pipeline, sort of we have products around that, then you can empower your users. They can then go like, they don't have to wait 3 months. They can go, oh, I need that data. I'm going to do that analysis. I'm going to go impress my boss, or I'm going to impress my customers. I'm going to go and like you have empowered your users to go drive that.
Yeah. So you guys support a number of different tools on the front end from an access standpoint. So how is that?
Yeah. So our core apps are, we support a data integration app, which is like getting information from siloed systems to an EBS and Aurora. And one of the announcements we did today jointly with AWS is we're helping AWS get information out of complex systems like mainframe and IBM to Aurora and the AWS systems. The second app we do is on data governance and catalog. The problem that I talked to you about is like, how do you go and map this information and really figure out, well, there's some piece of information you don't want anyone touching. There's other pieces of information that are critical and so on. We have an app on data observability. And this is like, so we've seen observability. It's been around for 10 years, but why can't you get that for your data? Like, I'll give you a simple example. You might have a column of data, right? And you're used to kind of seeing, so let's say 50-50 male, female on the distribution side. And all of a sudden something changed. It's like 100 male and 1 female. So that's clearly out. The observability system is not going to catch that, right? But the data observability system is going to be like proactively, something's going on with your system. Like infrastructure team's not going to tell you that. Yeah. The data team now is empowered to go, oh, there's something going on. Let me go investigate that. And then quality and enrichment are the two other apps that we have. On the quality side, like we're on the age of AI. There is a ton of investment that's going into building models, but if you don't go fix your data quality, like that model is not going to do you a whole lot of good. So companies are investing in data quality and really building resilience around that. And then finally, I think this is the last frontier for companies, is data enrichment. It's not enough. Like you think it's petabytes of data, but you're often missing the third-party context, right? Like you might be looking at how your customers are using it. You don't have the enrichment. We're kind of looking at property or mobile data, how people based on demographics. So you want to enrich that into your data pipeline. So those are the capabilities that we have apps on.
So you talk a little bit about the data team.
Yeah, yeah.
So what does that mean? Is there a chief data officer now?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a thing
now.
now. So if we did a poll. I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think 3/4 of the Fortune 100 are hiring or in the process, or hired or in the process of hiring CDOs. There's probably more investment, net new investment going into the data teams than infrastructure teams. I think there's a realization that if you want to go drive a business transformation, you got to get your data piece right.
And then finally, data is an asset, right?
Yeah.
People are starting to think about, hey, this is a monetizable asset. This is either my intellectual property or my customer data or something that I'm able to analyze to derive additional revenue streams or increase my kind of revenue per customer and the like, and really starting to treat it that way. So again, interesting to see a company that's out there really focusing specifically on the data, because again, we come to AWS, right? We get all focused on the shiny things, oh, hey, this new instance type and that new database kind of capability.
It's absolutely, I think you think of data as a monetizable asset. Data is also a massive competitive differentiator, right? You kind of look at the companies like like Netflix and like AWS, right? the companies that have done really well have great insights, are very reactive to data, and they've built that muscle, right? And that's it. Like, if you don't do that, like, you have the same amount of data. AWS is not generating new data to run their business. They have the same amount of data any other company does, or Netflix, or pick your company. But if you invested in a data integrity infrastructure, a data ops infrastructure, then you're set up.
Yeah, interesting. So, all right, so we talked about the, so you made the announcements with AWS here, and I know we're here at AWS, right? And I shouldn't really talk about this, but let's talk about multi-cloud, right?
Yeah,
so you guys
let's do it.
support, kind of data in other cloud platforms. What about on-prem? So is that all one consistent data infrastructure from the standpoint of what you guys
let me tell you a little bit about our strategy here. So we're multi-cloud. So our control plane, where you go define your data quality, data governance, data integration, is a SaaS app. It sits in AWS, but you can go run that anywhere you want. Where your data plane could be in AWS, could be in Azure, could be on-prem, we're an agent. So we think the reality is it is a multi-cloud world. There's still a ton of data on-prem, but the customers are tired of, like, they don't want an on-prem solution. They want a SaaS solution with a SaaS control plane, but deployed where you want to. So, and I think that's the reality. Like, there's still a ton of data in mainframes. Like, forget on-prem. Still a ton of data in mainframe, ton of data on-prem. And companies by nature, M&A or whatever drives them, have a multi-cloud posture. So they're not going to consolidate at all. Very frankly, I don't know anyone who's done that. So providing a solution where they can go have a single centralized control plane and go run it where they want, I think that's our plan.
All right. Data ops, you heard it here. I'm not going to say first, but you certainly have heard it here. Arjun from Precisely, thank you so much. How do folks get in touch with you guys?
Precisely.com. Check out our data integrity suite. We've got demos there, and I'd love for you to check that out.
All right. Well, hey, appreciate the time, man.
You bet. Take care.
All right. And thanks for seeing us here at Techstrong TV. We will be back with another interview, shortly.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everyone. We're back here at AWS reInvent in our Techstrong TV studio at the Wynn. And our guest right now is from Red Hat. We haven't had anybody in Red Hat. This is our third day here. So welcome. I want to introduce you to, and I'm going to do my best on his name, Sarwar Raza. Right? Did I get it?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Welcome, Sarwar. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I guess we should start with a little bit of your background and what you do at Red Hat.
Sure. So I am the Vice President and General Manager for Red Hat's Cloud Services business. So I lead our entire cloud services portfolio. And AWS is a premier cloud event. We have lots of interesting news that we've made here, and of course, meeting with lots of our joint customers.
Excellent. Something that gets tossed around in tech especially, but all over, is, we have a special relationship. My grandmother used, when they'd ask her, well, which is your favorite grandchild? They're all special, right? And I love them all the same. But the fact of the matter is, there is a special relationship with Red Hat and AWS. Yes. We were talking off camera, you mentioned it. When you go through, I forget how many different AWS services it is, you don't see many other vendors named as a service, because it's always an AWS service. But the OpenShift service on AWS is actually, a joint Red Hat AWS service. And that goes to the depth of the relationship. You mentioned the 60,000 joint customers between AWS and Red Hat, which is a lot of customers, man.
Sure. Yeah, and our collaboration actually goes back, about 14 years, starting with the availability of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right, as an option for your compute images, it has progressed. You mentioned the Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS, and the way I like to tell people is just go down the list of services, right? And it's a very long list. You'll go down until you reach one that doesn't start with AWS or Amazon. So again, first party, natively integrated, jointly engineered and supported. It's something that our joint customers wanted. It helps our Red Hat customers have a consistent hybrid experience across their on-premises estate, as well as in the AWS public cloud and other public clouds that we could talk about later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, look, that's a theme we've been in here on 3 days. Of course, we're talking a lot about AWS because we're at AWS reInvent. And they are the largest public cloud. No one, I think, is disputing that at this point. But generally, vendors such as a Red Hat and others, they support Google and Microsoft too, and for good reason. So there were a number of announcements, either at the show or just recently, in anticipation of reInvent, that Red Hat made. I don't want to tax your memory too much, but if maybe we can go through some of the bigger ones, one of the ones you feel are most important.
Sure. Right here at reInvent, we announced the general availability of our Red Hat OpenShift data science fully managed service on AWS. So this is an AI MLOps platform that allows increased collaboration between administrators, IT ops, developers, and data scientists to be able to build intelligent applications. It runs on Red Hat OpenShift on AWS, and it's also available as a marketplace offering. On the OpenShift data science capabilities, it's been in preview for a little while, lots of excitement from customers, and as part of the GA, we've added support for custom Jupyter images, enhanced GPU support for NVIDIA GPUs, as well as a new integration with Pachyderm for lifecycle management of data pipelines. So all capabilities that allow developers and data scientists to be able to come together and really solve business problems in a simple integrated environment. As part of that, I mentioned making it available in Marketplace, where we've also made available our Red Hat OpenShift Streams for Kafka product in Marketplace. And this follows the introduction of Red Hat Ansible in the AWS Marketplace at Ansible Fest last month. So you see a trend here, right? Mm-hmm. We have customers, joint customers, who are making choices about the ecosystems that they want to participate in, the ecosystems that they trust for discovery, content creation, and support, and increasingly how they want to transact. Right? These marketplaces are give customers a mechanism to be able to consume committed spends with their cloud providers towards solutions, whether they're native solutions or otherwise, that are listed in the marketplace. So this is Red Hat's commitment to making sure we can provide open hybrid cloud solutions to customers in whatever way they want to consume them.
I think at some point when someone writes like the history of AWS or the history of cloud or just modern technology, the notion of marketplaces like this is a sleeper that people don't realize the true power of. And quite frankly, it's not just AWS. No. I don't care whether you're talking about like the Atlassian marketplace or IBM marketplaces and so forth. The fact is the marketplace is a great equalizer because it's almost like a meritocracy, right? Mm-hmm. You have the solutions up there and it's self-serve.
Yep.
And users, they don't have to deal with pushy salespeople, hopefully, or, it's self-serve. Yeah. They decide what's the right solution and they may play with 2 or 3 before they actually pick, what's the right one for them.
Correct.
But it also allows someone who you're just getting started in a platform. Where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah.
Right? And what else can I do? And man, let me go on the marketplace and check it out. And so what's the highest rated ones? What's the most downloaded ones? What are the most popular?
Yeah.
And instantly I become savvy about it. So it's the market. The power of the marketplace is, I think, vastly underreported and underrated. Right. What I find interesting about these latest offerings is, look, I think everyone knows, hey, I want to run Red Hat Enterprise Linux on Amazon? Check. Right? I want to run OpenShift on Amazon? Check. Those are meat and potatoes, right? They're table stakes. I mean, there are a lot of people using that. But now, with the theme of this show, which is cloud evolving, cloud maturing, cloud being more capable, we're starting to see a data science offering, right? Think about that.
Yeah.
That's not just, let me spin up an instance and put a web server up there or an app server up there or a database. No, we're doing data science, right? Which encompasses a whole bunch of different pieces of that. It's pretty complicated.
Absolutely, and there's a spectrum of maturity as well as a spectrum of needs, right? And what we hear from our customers is, yes, they want the built for the cloud, fully managed, open source data science offering, right, in marketplace, but they also want to see our application platforms and runtimes made available. So, we have a product called EAP, which is a J2EE application server, right? Again, a technology that is still very, very popular in the enterprise space. Customers who will be on those platforms for 10, 20 years from now and need to move to the cloud. And so, you'll see our catalog. As part of our catalog, you can get EAP server, pay as you go, consumption based, from Red Hat in the AWS marketplace, right? Go knock yourself out. So really, for us, we see customers gravitating towards using the marketplace, A, to transact more efficiently, right? B, as you said, it's a great equalizer because you get the marketplace provider sort of setting the bar for quality, for security, for manageability, right? And so it's good to be able to offer that catalog to customers who have picked an ecosystem, right? And said, now that you're in this ecosystem, right? Here's our catalog of offerings within that catalog for you to be able to deploy as you see fit.
I agree. So one of the questions I always have, though, is, look, you do the self-serve thing, you're using AWS, but now I want Red Hat. I want to engage with Red Hat, right? Yes, it's a joint offering, but I need Red Hat to help me here. How do customers bridge that, right? So in other words, I downloaded it from the marketplace. I need a little help. I want to engage maybe ProServe, or I need help.
Yeah. So so most of our customers on the enterprise side have existing relationships with us, and so for them, obviously, they can rely on their account teams or whatever. For everyone else, we have dedicated customer success teams that are charged with making sure that our customers in the cloud have the best experience, right from day zero to through their life cycle. So we provide means for customers to be able to reach out, be able to chat with us online, or engage with us or for support. We are kind of a unique software vendor in that all our offerings are open sourced. Right? Everything comes from upstream. So really, a lot of the value we bring is in the lifecycle management, the expertise, and of course the support and care and feeding of the customer experience.
So it's been that way with Red Hat too.
So you don't lose any of that in the cloud.
Excellent. Have we hit all the offerings or all the announcements coming out of here?
Yes, we have.
All right. If someone we gave it to them in rapid fire. Is there a place online they could go see?
Sure. Redhat.com. Go to our newsroom, and you'll see both the press release and links to blogs.
On all of these.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming up and spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Go check out a whole slew of Red Hat announcements and new offerings coming out here around AWS reInvent. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with our next guest in just a moment.
Do you know what you want?
Can we afford this place?
I'm thinking 1,000-piece Kubernetes, cloud workload protection, and XDR combo.
Yeah, I actually don't see any prices.
Hello, how can I schedule a demo for you today?
So we're on a budget. How much is your 1,000-piece Kubernetes?
What solutions are you currently evaluating?
You don't have to order off that thing.
We don't?
How did you get in here? Check this out.
Uptick secret dollar menu.
Order today and you can secure any combo of cloud and endpoint assets through the end of next year. All for $1.
What if I want to secure 100 Mac laptops and 900 Linux servers?
Yeah, $1. What if I want 500 laptops and 500 Kubernetes nodes? Just $1? Yep, mix and match to create the combo that works for you.
What about customer support?
Yep, everything for just $1. We're gonna order off the Uptick secret dollar menu. And seriously, how did you get in here?
Seriously.
Try the Uptick's combo of CNAP and XDR, delivered in a single UI and data model. Just $1 to secure your cloud, containers, and laptops through the end of next year. Offer ends December 31st.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our airing of Techstrong Research Review and Engineering the Change, we had plenty of great content today. This will be our last broadcast of the year as we are taking a little winter hiatus. All of us at Techstrong here wish you a very happy holidays, and we'll see you back on January 3rd when we will start back up our broadcasts. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.